Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David LaFrance. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the American Water Works Association, and I have the distinct honor of welcoming all of you to today's forum as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act. I've got to say, as I stand up here looking out at the star-studded audience, I feel a little bit intimidated addressing all of you. So thank you all for coming. It's very much appreciated, and we're so honored to have such a great group of people joining us here today. You know, this forum is designed to provide opportunities to look back over the past 40 years and appreciate the accomplishments that we've all achieved, talk about our current state of safe drinking water, and to talk about what the future also holds. Events like this wouldn't happen without sponsors. And so I just want to take a moment to recognize some of the people who've been sponsors of this great event. The Association of State, and also SAFE, by the way, Drinking Water Administrators, the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, the National Association of Water Companies, and the National Rural Water Association. Let's give all of those groups a hand. There's many people who we should be appreciating and thanking right now, but two come to mind in particular. One is the US EPA, and we really have to appreciate all the hard work that the US EPA has put into this, and we'll be hearing from them as we move through the program. And the other one is all of the employees who work for water utilities across the nation, and recognizing the day-to-day, 24/7 hard work that they do to make sure water is safe to drink for everyone. I think as we go through this, I'm going to introduce a video here in a second. The video was produced, it provides a little background and history on the Safe Drinking Water Act. It was produced by the Minnesota Department of Health. So I'm going to warn the audience, it is 100% biased towards how great the Minnesota Department of Health is. And I am quite confident that they are great. But that greatness is replicated in many places across the nation. But it's their video, so they took front stage. I think as you watch this video, a couple of things to keep in mind. This morning, as I was thinking about these opening remarks, I realized that 80% of my life, I've been able to go to the kitchen faucet and pour out a glass of drinking water and not really be concerned about its safety. And I would say, you know, for a large part of that, I did not really even realize that I had that luxury, right? Because I was, you know, younger and not as involved in the water industry as I have been for the past 30 years. But then I started looking at the US population, right? The US population is over 300 million, about 320 million, making us the third largest country in the world, behind China and India. And both of those countries have populations that exceed ours by about a factor of 4. I think it just goes without question that despite that population gap, the quality of our water exceeds the quality of their water by at least a factor of 4. And so I think it's an impressive thing that we are providing for 320 million people. But more impressive to me, and also sort of, I think kind of a profound result of the Safe Drinking Water Act is that the median age of someone living in the US today is 36.7 years old. So those people, over 50% of the population, has never lived in the United States when there wasn't the Safe Drinking Water Act. They've never lived in the United States when you couldn't go to the tap and have confidence that the water that you're about to drink is safe. And that is just a luxury that will continue. That statistic is going to grow and grow as we all age and new people come in, and it's just tremendous. It does create a related issue for us, which is that the luxury of going and having safe drinking water at every faucet, every water dispenser around the United States, it also creates the fact that people just don't have to think about it. So we as an industry have a duty to keep in the front of the minds of our population the fact that while we're the third largest population, and that we also have the best water that you could possibly have. And in part, it's because of the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's because of the US EPA, and in part because of all of the great professionals who make sure water is safe every single day. So with that, why don't we tee up the video and enjoy just a quick reflection of the history of the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Water, our most precious natural resource. On December 16, 1974, President Gerald Ford signed the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, marking the first time a national program of regulations and standards was established to include all public water suppliers in the United States. Walter Mondale, who would later become the Vice President of the United States, was a U.S. Senator when the act was passed.
The 74 Act helped get people's attention, and a lot more progress was made as a result. So we were able to, I would say, fundamentally reform the role of the national government as a protector of the environment, and working, of course, with the states and the local governments to get it done. As we used to say, water and air don't respect state boundaries. So the states, Minnesota was probably, again, the best in the country, but many states were not doing a good job. Americans couldn't be sure of safe drinking water. And the 74 Act that we passed was designed to use the power of the federal government to provide leadership and funding to help states do the job.
What I had to decide is, where am I going to stand on these questions? And I laid this principle that with air and water, that is national. And you don't worry about your home area as though you're doing something just for them. You're doing something for a good part of the nation if you work in the air and water part of it, because water travels across state lines. And to leave it to each state, then how horrible it would be if Minnesota, for instance, would not have pure water, and it flows in 3 different areas from the state. And so that's our responsibility as citizens of this nation.
Minnesota was fortunate that it had strong regulations in place well before the Safe Drinking Water Act passed. In 1872, a typhoid fever outbreak linked to impure drinking water created an urgency to establish the State Board of Health, now the Minnesota Department of Health. Throughout the 20th century, Minnesota has expanded its efforts and programs to ensure safe water.
In 1974, when the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed, it really, I think, brought that level of treatment and mandated it for all levels of government and water suppliers in the United States. Whereas before then, it was more than likely identified in the big cities as something that was really required and important. But this brought it out to every public water supply in the United States, which takes that safety aspect not only in the urban areas, but out towards all of the areas of the country that are served by public water supplies.
It's important that we continue to talk about prevention. Prevention is the single most effective strategy, the most cost-effective strategy that we have in cleaning up our water resources. If we have to spend money to treat water, either through wastewater treatment or through drinking water treatment plants, that's an unwise use of our money. That's less sustainable than preventing the harm in the first place.
The Safe Drinking Water Act ensures that when people take a drink of water in the United States, that they can be assured that water's been tested, the water's safe to drink, and it meets all the requirements of the Act.
To be able to go into anybody's home, turn on the tap, get that cold water out there, have a drink of water, and not worry about it. Yeah, and so I love it, because people come here and visit, and then they want a drink of water, and I say, they grab a glass out of the cupboard, and they open the tap in the kitchen and drink it. I said, they have confidence, not in me, but in this whole community.
Safe drinking water is almost the first requirement of a prosperous community. If you have questions, serious questions about safe water, clean water, people are going to do something about that. And it could be a small town, so it could ruin it. You start with that.
Everyone plays a role in guarding the safety of our water and making sure investments are made to keep it that way. Small but significant actions by individuals can and do result in massive collective gains. While the federal act continues to evolve, Minnesota has made progress in its own ways.
Minnesota has been really forward-looking in terms of environmental issues. And I think the legacy amendment here in Minnesota in 2008, which really set aside some resources to really protect our groundwater and our surface water. And it has been a good investment, and it's an investment for the future while we work today to protect things for our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren.
Safe and adequate drinking water is something we all rely on. Congress has a responsibility to ensure that America's drinking water is protected and available to everyone. Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, is a leader in providing safe drinking water. Today, over 4 million Minnesotans get their tap water from public water systems. The Minnesota Department of Health, the Metropolitan Council, and other agencies are working together to protect our water sources so all Minnesotans can easily access safe drinking water supplies today and tomorrow.
While a lot of the discussion had to do with Minnesota, the principles that they talked about, I think, are easily replicated across the United States for everyone who is involved in providing safe drinking water. And now I'd like to introduce Peter Gravatt to you, the Director of EPA's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, who will introduce our keynote speaker, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy. Peter?
Thank you, David. It's great to be here with all of you today to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act and really to celebrate the great accomplishments that all of you, with all of your colleagues at home, have made to protect public health of the American people. So thank you so much for being here. And I am delighted that we're joined today by EPA's Administrator Gina McCarthy to kick off today's event. And for decades, Administrator McCarthy has been a leading advocate for common sense strategies to protect public health and the environment. And Administrator McCarthy was appointed by President Obama as the Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation back in 2009, and then became Administrator of EPA in 2013. Prior to joining EPA, Administrator McCarthy served as the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection and held multiple positions in state government in the state of Massachusetts. And I am so delighted and so pleased that you've joined us here today. Please join me in welcoming Administrator Gina McCarthy.
Happy anniversary. I think I'm done. No, just kidding. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction and for all the great and important work you do at EPA. And I want everybody to know that Gwen Keys-Fleming is over there. Say, hey, Gwen. Gwen is my Chief of Staff. She does great work to keep all the trains running at the agency. Let me just spend a few minutes with you because I can't help but take advantage of the opportunity to have so many movers and shakers in one room. And first of all, thank you for all the hard work that you do. But secondly, we'd really like you to do more hard work and increase the output if you wouldn't mind. Now, I just want to tell you, just give you a sense of where the agency's heading and some of the work we need to do together. Not too long ago, I spent a little bit of time in Milwaukee. It was actually really fun, the first time I've ever spent any time there. And I went to a small brewery called Lakefront Brewery. Ooh, that's easy for me to say, isn't it? And it was really fun to go there, not only because I really like to sample the products so that I won't make anybody feel bad when I go, but they use 20,000 gallons of water every day to make 4,000 gallons of beer. And when I was there, they were so excited to explain to me that the water in Milwaukee is perfect for brewing. It has some kind of just the right balance of minerals. And while I didn't see any chemistry or science to back that up, I think it's true because the beer was great. That's all I know. It's an unscientific testimonial. But I'm not here actually to advance the interests of the brewery. I am here because that really got me to thinking about how much we take clean water for granted, and how the fact is that tap water being clean enough to drink just about anywhere in this country today is really a result of what the video you just saw, the leaders who brought to us the Safe Drinking Water Act. And it's all a testament to the hard work of you people that are sitting in this room and many others who have taken on this challenge in such a significant and difficult and persistent way. And I want to thank you for that, because your work has been tremendous. And I know that it's not just about writing a law, it's about implementing it effectively and figuring out how you can explain to people the fundamental need that you're trying to provide to them, and thinking creatively about how you get the resources to make these things happen. And most of you know that even in Milwaukee, this wasn't always the case. And it's certainly not the case in many other places in the U.S. In the past, because before the Safe Drinking Water Act passed 40 years ago, 40% of the nation's water systems failed to meet even basic health standards. 40% of them. Even in the early 90s, before the 96 amendments of the law passed, Milwaukee experienced one of the worst drinking water outbreaks in our nation's history. So it was very cool to go there and see that times have changed so significantly in this area. And it really is thanks to the Drinking Water Act and dedicated drinking water professionals across the U.S., including those folks who brew delicious beer at Lakefront Brewery, because what you've done by providing safe drinking water is not only clearly to protect the public health of the people we all serve, but it also protects those breweries. It protects those 107 jobs of people that matter to more than 107 of those people, and plus tens of millions of others across the country who really are the businesses that rely on clean drinking water all the time to do their work, whether they're small businesses or large businesses. They cannot operate day in and day out, just like we can't operate if we don't have clean drinking water. And that's what Walter Mondale, one of all of, I think, our heroes, and our Senate leaders envisioned and understood when they wrote the Safe Drinking Water Act 40 years ago. Today, we almost take some of the progress we have made for granted, don't we? People think, oh, we've done a great job, let's move on to other things and everything will just stay great. But we know that safe drinking water is a constant challenge. And we have to continue to nurture the work that we do to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and to think about how far we've come and how far we have to go to keep it vibrant and alive and deliver on the promises of Walter Mondale and other great leaders. And Americans drink, and let's not forget, 1 billion glasses of tap water every day. That's just tap water. I refuse to acknowledge the bottled kind, although it's nice. We enjoy the cleanest drinking water in the world, with more than 90% of Americans receiving water that meets all of the standards all of the time. We owe that accomplishment to this incredible law, and again, your hard work, whether it's at the state level, the county level, the local level, or whether it's your innovation and your entrepreneurship that can bring new technologies to the table, that can deliver that clean water to meet new challenges, or to deliver that clean water to continue to address those older challenges in a way that's more and more cost-effective and reliable. You know, clean and reliable water is the foundation of what makes America great. It's what lets our children grow up healthy. It's what keeps our schools and our hospitals running. And that's what fuels our economy. So today, I want to talk about what it will take to keep our water safe and reliable for our kids, for our businesses, for our communities, for the next 40 years. So let's celebrate this anniversary, but look forward to ones when we can get back together 80 years from now and say we've made continual, remarkable progress for the people that we serve. From power plants to manufacturers to local brewers to companies all across America, they depend on clean water. And one of my favorite experiences as the administrator was when I was sitting in a room and I wasn't speaking, I was just listening, and I was listening to both Coke and Pepsi argue. But they weren't arguing between themselves. They were arguing about how important it is that we take action to fight climate change. Because guess what? Climate change makes clean water more and more difficult to achieve. And they told us that it's about time that government took action and figured out more comprehensively about what all of our environmental challenges mean in a changing climate, and how do we factor that into our thinking and our decision-making today. Major companies understand that they have to go where water is clean. That is part of the product that they produce. It is an ingredient, not just a luxury, to have clean water for Coke and for Pepsi to produce their products. And to keep those companies in the U.S., we need to keep our water clean, because they'll go and take those thousands of jobs with them wherever they can have more certainty about having clean water available for them that is affordable and plentiful, that they can rely on consistently. So in this instance, there's nothing different between beer and Coke and Pepsi. So drink more. No, I can't tell you that. I took that analogy way too far. But we have entered a bit of a new era, and it's one we have to think about, because climate change is making our jobs harder. It's meaning that the legacy water challenges will need to have some new solutions and some new thinking, but our efforts are making a difference. We know that the Department of Commerce found that the U.S. environmental technology industry generated $320 billion in revenue and employed 1.7 million Americans in 2011 alone. That is American ingenuity at work. That is because there is a demand, and when there is a demand that we articulate clearly, we know that the private sector will step up and help fill that void. There's a reason water technology makes up the biggest piece of that pie that I just mentioned. And it's because water, frankly, is gold. And it is getting more and more valuable as time goes on. In fact, it's not just the lifeblood that we depend on personally, but it is the lifeblood of our economy. And that said, we need to face new challenges, and we need to continue to provide safe, reliable drinking water to the American people, but we have to focus on every step from source to tap. Every step from source to tap. We can't afford to look at water issues in isolation. Protecting water is a lot like raising your kids. You can't just show up when your kids are in their late teens and expect them to be on the road to being healthy, responsible adults. You have to nurture them from the very beginning when they're infants, and you have to set them up for a safe and healthy life. Even when you do that, it's frightening when you have teenagers to wonder if they are going to be safe and healthy. So let's not make that challenge more difficult and that question larger. Let's work from the beginning to the end of this process. And the same is true, really, for our drinking water. We can't just treat it at the end of the line and expect it to be as clean and reliable and affordable as we need it to be, we have to protect it again from source to tap. And we're in a challenging situation. And I think you know that probably better than I know that, because you work with this situation on a daily basis. EPA estimates that the United States needs $384 billion in drinking water infrastructure investments, from maintenance to repairs and to replacement. And meanwhile, budgets have been tight at every level of government, and it doesn't look like that situation is going to change anytime soon. So we're looking to see how we can better integrate our work across the Clean Water Act all the way to the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we need new approaches to infrastructure, to these partnerships, to source water protection, to see how we can face the challenges of today more successfully. You know, EPA is promoting integrated planning. We're promoting it so that cities can sequence their wastewater and their stormwater projects to get the biggest bang for the buck for the customers that they serve. This fall, we offered technical assistance to more than 20 cities to jumpstart that planning process. And when we do our jobs well on stormwater and wastewater, what that means is that those become a direct investment in drinking water quality as well. That's just how it works. And the success of our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund investments has been unparalleled. We've provided $26 billion in financing to more than 10,000 projects since 1997. But we can't continue to just rely on that moving forward, because we have to do more and we have to be more creative. When you look at the need versus what we can continue to do, you will see there is a gap that needs to be filled. The SRFs are, as you know, more than direct loan programs. They are job creators as well as public health protectors, and these investments pay tremendous dividends. So to build on our success, we're working more closely than ever with state and federal agencies, as well as the private sector, to leverage new funding sources. If it's that valuable, and if water is gold, we need more people making those investments. And at the local level, we recognize that mayors are on the front lines of all of this work. They're setting sewer and water rates, and they're building infrastructure, and they too know that tackling water challenges really requires us to think about a game change. That's why cities are embracing green infrastructure. We're capturing rain where it falls. That's an exciting thing, but the most exciting thing is we're letting nature clean it right away, and we're keeping it local rather than thinking about treating it in the back end and shifting it away. If it's worth a lot of gold, keep it where you have it. Nurture it, reuse it. Find a way to let green infrastructure work for you, because frankly, green infrastructure gives a tremendous boost to cities. Mayors love it. It actually looks better. It increases property values. It attracts additional private investment. It helps grow local economies. Let's think together about how we think differently, knowing now that the science tells us that this is better than the work we have ever done before in terms of protecting public health and the environment. And let's not forget that source water protection is still a critical issue that we have yet to put a check mark beside. The original Safe Drinking Water Act left this crucial piece of the puzzle, focusing on water that comes out of our taps, into the hands of all of us. They knew that we needed to do more than just the Safe Drinking Water Act, and they knew we needed to work together to get it done. But as the years went by, we realized it was a lot cheaper to protect source water in the first place rather than to leave this as an unspoken or less attended part of the water cycle. And we know we don't want to continue to rely solely on more and more expensive treatment at the back end alone. So that's why in '96, the Safe Drinking Water Act amendments made sure that they gave the job to the states to assess their drinking water sources, as well as to take a look at what are the factors that were threatening those drinking water sources. Every state completed that step well over a decade ago. But not all states took action as a result of that information. That's a significant area in which we need increased partnership and action, because we have seen a few stark reminders that if we don't continue to focus on source water protection, then we actually can't address these issues effectively and keep people having the luxury of drinking water that is clean for them in 90% of the communities in the United States, 90% in all of the time. In Charlestown, West Virginia, we saw this was the case. The local water utility didn't learn that the chemical MCHM had spilled into their drinking water intake until folks noticed a strange odor. That is not when you want to have, that's not what I call an early warning system. Let me just explain that. But the governor, in the end, estimated that this spill cost $70 million to his community. $70 million. They could have done better. We all need to do better so that that doesn't get into the system and have those expensive costs. In Toledo, Ohio, we had algae in Lake Erie that produced a toxin. This is where climate change, new pollutants, new threats come into focus. It's a toxin that made its way into the city's water supply. Local businesses came to a standstill, and nearly 500,000 people were left without safe drinking water for 2 days. We need to do more, folks. We need to know more about maintaining our eye on the legacy issues that have consistently been a problem, as well as the new challenges that continue to expand the work that we need to do together. Now, EPA will continue to coordinate efforts to protect America's drinking water at the source, as well as to address these new challenges and these legacy issues that we all have been facing together. Now, on source water protection, I think you all may know that EPA convenes the Source Water Protection Collaborative. It's a partnership of 25 organizations that are united together to protect drinking water sources. And EPA has taken an important step to protect headwaters and small streams from pollution with our proposed Clean Water Rule, which will reduce the need for expensive treatment. The public comment period on that rule ended last month, and the feedback we've received shows just how important this issue of clean water is to everyone. That's why the organizations here are launching a call to action. They're asking utilities, states, federal agencies, and local governments to step it up. Let's protect source water. And I encourage all of us to work together to do just that. Utilities can partner with landowners and businesses and make sure they have plans in place with emergency responders. States and local governments can help with land use planning to protect water where it counts most. States can help update source water assessments, and they can take the action based on what those assessments tell them about what their biggest risks are and where there are opportunities to maintain affordable water supplies. And federal agencies, we know, can work better together. Not just the agencies within our sphere of EPA and all our regional offices, but we know that we have a partnership that we need to form across the federal government if you believe, as I do, that clean water is important to every aspect of our life. every aspect, including our economy. We're working with the USDA Rural Development to better serve the 97% of our nation's water systems with fewer than 10,000 customers. We're offering specially tailored technical assistance and financing options for rural water systems. We're helping to make sure they have the resources as well as the expertise that they need. And when it comes to dealing with climate impacts, EPA is working hard with both state and local governments to help them weave the challenge of climate change and the science that we understand into their local and state decisions. You know, we have a climate resilience tool that is specifically designed to help folks think through their drinking water challenges, specifically the utilities, so they can adapt to that changing climate. We know that in the end, water will continue to be as valuable as gold, if not more valuable, because it's one of those things where in a changing climate, you either have too much or you have too little. Right now, we see drought challenges that are amazing, and we see storm intensities that we have never seen before. And those will impact directly all of our ability to do our jobs. Just take a look after Hurricane Sandy, which I think brought all of this into such stark contrast, because that hurricane destroyed drinking water and wastewater treatment plants along the East Coast. This was in October of 2012. And EPA made nearly $95 million available to New York and New Jersey to help make drinking water systems not just get replaced, but make them more resilient to extreme weather. There are lessons we are learning. Let's not continue to learn the hard way. Let's learn from this one and understand how we work in partnership together. And we're working with states and disaster recovery agencies to make sure that the lessons we learned in Hurricane Sandy really are implemented elsewhere before a storm is hit, because we want to make sure that our water and wastewater facilities continue to function the day after the hurricane has left. You know, there are a lot of great efforts that are going on. I think you know that very well. But really, the crux of our ability to continue to make those efforts moving forward and to have the success we have seen over the past 40 years is for us to continue to agree to work together, for us to have honest dialogues about what's working, what's not working, how we adapt to the changes that we're seeing today, and how we continue to challenge the private sector to become part of the continued success as we move forward. We have an obligation, and I think that many of us express this a little less frequently than we should. It really is an obligation to protect our most precious resource, which is actually those kids, before they turn into teenagers, because then you really don't want them around. Personal note. It really is an obligation to our kids to figure out how to do this and how we make the next 40 years successful, because that's when they are going to be driving the economic choices of this country. That's when they are going to be bringing up their families. We need to work with communities to protect those really special resources that we all have been serving, frankly, for the past 40 years. And you guys know better than anyone just how important protecting drinking water has been, how difficult it has been, but how successful our partnership has been over the past 40 years. And we know that the challenges we face are not going to get easier, but if we keep making those infrastructure investments, if we keep building partnerships, if we keep protecting source water, then I think we can continue to make a very positive difference in the lives of the people that we most care about. And today, as always, we really have to work together, but that's a good thing, because when we do, the Safe Drinking Water Act will protect future generations for decades to come. So when you get an opportunity, lift a glass filled with clean, beautiful water and toast to the next 40 years. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again to Administrator McCarthy so much for being here with us today. And we're going to move now to the first panel, and I have the pleasure of moderating that panel. And I will introduce now at the beginning our two speakers for the panel who are going to join us here in the front. And these are James Saltzman and Vic Kim. And Jim Saltzman, now I'm going to need some help here, I have to say. Jim Saltzman holds joint appointments at Duke University as the Samuel Fox Mordecai, thank you. The Samuel Fox Mordecai Professor of Law at the Law School and at the Nicholas Institute Professor of Environmental Policy at the Nicholas School for the Environment. He's written 8 books and 70 articles and book chapters on topics ranging from trade and environment conflicts, drinking water, environmental protection in the service economy, wetlands mitigation, banking, and the legal institutional issues in creating markets for ecosystem services. Included in the books he has authored is a book titled Drinking Water, A History, which was praised as a recommended read by Scientific American and excerpted in Natural History. And I bet you might even be able to get a copy today if you happen to have a checkbook or cash. And then Vic Kim has joined us as well. And Vic joined the EPA at its inception in 1970, and he served as Deputy Director in the Office of Planning and Evaluation for 5 years, Director of the Office of Drinking Water for 10 years, and as Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Office of Prevention, Pesticides, and Toxic Substances for another 10 years. Following his career at EPA, he taught at the University of Southern California, Graduate School of Public Administration, and he recently co-authored an article titled The Safe Drinking Water Act, the First 10 Years, in a publication on the 100-year anniversary of the American Water Works Association. So I think we are going to start with Jim Saltzman in his presentation. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
All right, so let's see if we can get this up here. Perfect. So Vic is going to talk about the first 10 years of the Safe Drinking Water Act, and I'm going to talk about the first 3,000 before that. So let us begin. As Peter said, this is drawn from a book that I wrote called Drinking Water, A History. If one looks really throughout the whole span of human history, right? Some people eat red meat, some people eat fish, some people eat no meat at all. Everyone drinks water, and that has always been the case. And so it's not surprising that if you look at excavations really throughout settlements, you always find drinking water engineering. You always find some type of structures that for the times that they're built are actually quite sophisticated. And so the farthest back we know is about 1000 BCE. This is a Keynote in Jordan. Machu Picchu of the Incas in Peru. This is a cistern above the Dead Sea, Masada, the driest place on earth. These are the cisterns below Istanbul, Constantinople. And what we find, we also find remnants or histories of water treatment as well. This was actually taken from a tomb in Egypt, from ancient Thebes. And we also find, if we look back, of course, not simply a focus on producing or storing and providing drinking water, but also rules for who gets the water. Right, so if we look back at the Bible, we find that, would they have rules on water? Yeah, if you live in an arid place and water's a scarcity, you've got rules for who gets the water. And it turns out that there actually was, the ancient wandering Jews had rules about law as well, and there was actually a right to water. Right, so basically anyone could take water if they wanted. If there was labor involved, then you could actually exclude people from the water if it was from a well. But even then, there was something called the right of thirst, which meant that if someone was in dire need of water, they got to drink. And you actually found that throughout the Middle East. If we go to ancient Rome, it was really the first civilization I know of that totally mastered water in so many respects. They focused on drinking water as well. Of course, they used the aqueducts to bring in fresh drinking water. And there was water as a right. They had something called the lacus. And so this is Pompeii. And you can see a basin here and a basin there. There were these marble basins throughout the cities where you get water for free. Rome's the first place we know of where you actually pay for drinking water. And so the way it worked was that you could actually pipe the water into your house, and the way you paid for it, because it was a gravity-flowing system, you paid a tax based on the diameter of your water pipe. It was called a vectigal. Why do we know this was valued? Because people tried to cheat. There was a problem called puncturing, where people in the dead of night would go out and puncture the pipes. They were built of lead, plumbum in Latin, and take them to their own house. There was a fine of 100,000 sesterces. I'm yet to figure out how much that actually is, but 100,000 most things is a lot. And of course, puncturing goes on today as well. This is a photo from Lagos, Nigeria. Here they're puncturing electricity, right? Don't try this at home. But this, the idea basically endures. After the fall of Rome, really, drinking water, safe drinking water, became an unknown experience. And so throughout Europe, really until about the middle of the 19th century, late 19th century, there was a very simple answer to this question. Right? You basically wanted to avoid drinking water if you could. There just wasn't the idea of safe drinking water. This is a wonderful quote. This was written by Francis Chappell, and basically what the author is saying is that they're talking about the Pilgrims in this case. They disliked, distrusted, and despised drinking water, right? Drinking water is bad, very bad for your health. You may not be surprised to know the second building that the Pilgrims constructed, or supposedly the second building in their New World settlement, was a brewery. And it was not because they had keg parties on Saturday night, right? They didn't trust the local water supplies. So let's talk about this a bit in the sense of moving up through American history. You all know the story of how the Dutch purchased Manhattan Island from the Native Americans for a chunk of beads. They build their fort. They build their drinking water outside. They build their well outside the fort. And where the New Yorkers, early New Yorkers in New Amsterdam, are getting their water is from these shallow wells in a pond called the Kalchook. The locals say to Peter Stuyvesant, "We need money to build wells." Stuyvesant says, "No, this is a business, not a charity. Take care of it yourself." The British come sailing in the Hudson. The Dutch run into their fort. They close the door. They turn around and realize there's no well in the fort. So they open the door. And the British take over New York, essentially. And one of the first things they do is they start building wells, but not a lot. And the New Yorkers are still relying on the collect for their drinking water. And the problem is New York's becoming urbanized, right? And the collect is becoming pretty awful with tanneries and waste and such. So an editorial at the time called it a very stinking common sewer. A guy called Peter Kalm is a Swedish botanist who was traveling the US in 1746. He had a line that Rodney Dangerfield would love. He said, "The drinking water in New York is so bad that horses from out of town refuse to drink it." So what happens? What happens is you get private commerce, tea water trade. People go up and down the street selling tea water. Doesn't really help the poor, doesn't help for fire prevention. So 1774, New York City actually issues money, sort of bonds, to produce waterworks. Very complicated construction, but it's terrible timing, right? The British occupy New York, destroy all of these. And so really towards the end of the 18th century, New York still has terrible water. And so now the story gets odd. And Aaron Burr, you all know Aaron Burr, he teams up with Alexander Hamilton. Yes, he's the same one he killed 8 years later. The business did not go well. Burr goes up to Albany and gets monopoly authority, a charter from the state to raise $2 million to provide pure and wholesome water. The idea is it will come from the Bronx River, but Burr was a scoundrel. And he had no intention of getting water. He actually pipes the water in from the collect. He uses almost all the money to lend it with interest. He basically wanted a bank charter without the restrictions. And so soon after, basically about 30 years later, the Manhattan Company becomes the Chase Manhattan Bank. It's a true story. This is where the Chase Manhattan Bank comes from. And I've been told that the logo is a cross-section of a wooden water pipe. So it's not until, right, so, whoops, there we go. So anyway, this is your sort of news niblet for the day in terms of interesting facts. It's not really until the early 1830s, really out of concern for fires, that you get water, large municipal water system in New York City. Okay, so now let me turn the story, sort of pivot it more toward the Safe Drinking Water Act in particular. Although I should note, I could tell similar stories about most of the American cities. Eventually, the municipalities step in to put in public waterworks. Benjamin Franklin, interestingly, in his will, left money for water to be piped in to Philadelphia from a distant source. And you get a large growth of municipal water systems, 400 by 1860, over 3,000 by 1900. But simply providing water isn't enough. The water has to be safe to drink, right? Is it safe to drink? Turns out this is actually a very complicated question, what people consider safe water. And it turns really on your conception of disease. And the fact is that really until about the late 19th century, most people didn't really think that serious diseases were caused by waterborne agents. And so this finally sort of takes hold in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and state authorities in the US are facing a challenge. And the challenge is the way a lot of people get their water at public places are these cups that are chained to faucets, right? You don't have the drinking water fountains yet. And if you're concerned about the germ theory, this is not a good idea. So what do? What you do is these public service campaigns. This is from the Minnesota State Board of Public Health. I think the message here is pretty clear. And if that wasn't clear, then maybe this one is clear. This is actually from an organization that was created. They called themselves the Cup Campaigners. And they had journals basically saying, you know, drink this, my pretty, and come with me to where you don't want to go, basically. So there's a need, actually, a market demand for some type of cup people can drink from, but that's cheap and disposable, and that's where you get the Dixie cup. That's sort of how the Dixie cup comes in this place. Eventually, around that era, you also get the first drinking fountain. This is patented in 1911, and that sort of takes on importance. But I think it's important also, as we talk about the history of drinking water in the US, there's a dark side as well, which is it became a potent symbol of segregation as well, in terms of access to resources. Okay, so let's now move towards sort of protecting the water specifically. So the first city in the U.S. To chlorinate its water is Jersey City. It's kind of a funny story because the city actually sued the water provider because the technology up to that had been sand filtration. And the city basically said, forget this chlorination stuff. We paid you to provide pure and wholesome water. That means sand filtration. And they go to court. And the court holds for the judge holds for the company. And this wonderful quote from New York Times, very prescient, says, so successful has been this experiment that any municipal water plant, no matter how large, can be made as pure as mountain spring water, right? Sounds like an ad today for bottled water. So the chlorination starting to spread, but there's pushes against chlorination as well. You can read this quote yourself. Again, I like the references to horses in many of these things, right? Horses from out of town apparently refuse to drink chlorinated water as well. So how does chlorination move across the states? It moves across the states because of the federal government. The Public Health Service adopts standards for interstate common carriers in 1914. And essentially what they say is if you're a PWS and you're providing water to train, boat, bus, it must be chlorinated. But the first list is fairly small. It's only bacteria that are covered. The standards were revised several times again. Safe Drinking Water Act, the discussion about that starts in 1970, but the standards hadn't been revised at that point for 8 years. And there's a huge concern, part thanks to Rachel Carson and other issues, about all these different contaminants that are out there that simply aren't covered by the Public Health Service standards. More important, only a small percent of the public water service providers public water suppliers are actually covered by these standards. And fewer than 14 states had adopted the standards. So this is what Administrator McCarthy was referring to when she talked about 40%. What she means specifically is there was a study done in 1969, 1970 by the Public Health Service, and what they found was pretty disturbing. They looked at 5 states, 5 states, and a lot of the samples exceeded the standards. They sort of extrapolated the results out and said up to 8 million people were drinking potentially dangerous water. Warren Magnuson was a big advocate of the Safe Drinking Water Act. In the congressional hearings, he said that the results they had in Washington, 2/3 of the system hadn't had any kind of chemical analysis. Within a year, 4% of the operators were certified, and only 7 of the 127 actually passed the state bacteriological standards. So in some places, drinking water was okay, but in a lot of places, there was real cause for concern. And that brings us to the hearings from 1970, effectively through 1974, for the Safe Drinking Water Act. One of the interesting things I found as I was looking at this history, initially it was called the Pure Drinking Water Act. And I don't know if that's because there was this sort of conceptual shift from providing pure water to safe water or not, but it's interesting how sort of risk entered into that. And these are some of the issues that arose. I think Vic is going to touch on some of these in his remarks as well. Should we have citizen suits? If we have citizen suits, should they be able to sue the PWS or just the government? Big debate about funding. The administration wanted no funding from the government. They wanted funding to basically be in the water bills. People are paying for the water. They can pay for better service, improved service as well. Do you want technology standards, performance standards? Should they report to the customers? Right? This had never been done before. Right? Should you require notifications if there's a serious violation? Should there be their own office? EPA have its own office of water supply. Do we talk about bottled water? Administrator McCarthy talked about source protection. And finally, who should we cover, right? There are enormous numbers of wells all over the country. Should they be in? Should they be out? And all of this sort of came into play to the final bill, Senate 433, that finally went, you can see Magnuson up there again, finally goes to the desk of Gerald Ford. This is actually the document that he signed. And so that's where we sort of find ourselves right before Vic comes in. I'm providing the perfect segue. So a few quick things to note. The first is, I don't know if you want to sort of do this or not, but I thought maybe we could sort of play the Drinking Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act Jeopardy later. I came across this from one of the partnership programs. But I think there's sort of three major things to take from the history of this. The first is that the Safe Drinking Water Act could have done any number of directions, right? The issues I talked about that were in play, what we have today was not an accident, right? These were deliberate decisions that were made, and as you know, it's been amended twice since then, right? So this is an act that has remained in flux, and I wouldn't be surprised if it changes again in the future if Congress starts passing environmental legislation. I can imagine SDWA changing once again. The second thing is that you all in this room come from an ancient and proud profession. Right? Folks have been concerned about providing drinking water ever since there have been human settlements. And the third point, which is what I want to end with, is the issues that we're wrestling with are not fundamentally different than those they were wrestling with 3,000 years ago. Right? You got to find the water, you got to protect it, and you got to distribute it, and you got to figure out what does safe mean. So the last thing I will mention is that it is the holiday season. So, all right, Vic, you.
Oh my. I think Jim's given us a pretty good background of the situation as the Safe Drinking Water Act came along. There certainly was a concern in Congress that the historical supervision programs, typically at the state level, were not performing as they would like to, and so they, in the spirit of that period, 1970, early 70s, federalized a number of related responsibilities. It was my great pleasure to serve as the head of the Drinking Water Program, which took that piece of paper he was looking at and said, now go make it happen. And that's what I will try and do in the next 10 or 15 minutes, give you some idea of the issues as they unfolded and how we tried to deal with them. I got the right one? Okay. Again, fundamentally, the statute federalized standard setting. And gave the government a lead role in both generating science-based standards, which will become important as we talk, and the government's role in making sure that there was compliance with the regulations. The statute enabled the states to participate in oversight programs as long as they came up with programs that were at least as stringent as the federal requirement. And third, it put the basic responsibility for monitoring the quality of the drinking water and attaining standards with the utilities themselves, as well as responsibilities to keep records and to report if, in fact, they exceeded the standard. As the program began, we had at least two policy concerns that we weren't sure how we were going to handle, and that was part of what evolved over the first few years. The first was how to set standards. Now, we're talking about scientific-based, peer-reviewed kinds of things for non-threshold contaminants. The new contaminants of concern were largely carcinogens. The conventional wisdom in the health community was that there was some risk at any exposure to a carcinogen. And whereas previously standards had been set pretty much from a health perspective, looking for a no-effect level in animal studies and dividing by a factor of safety, this was a different challenge, and we needed a new scientific rationale, which had to be invented or brought to the forth to figure out how to deal with regulating the carcinogens. And of course, at that point, the principal concern with disinfection byproducts, several of which at that point were thought to be carcinogens. The second question we characterized as how high to jump. And by that, what we meant was that faced with contamination, either an unregulated contaminant or above a standard, how rigorous should the interventions be? And what could we do to try to help promote a risk assessment, site-specific risk assessments that would lead to rational public policies. You can't shut them all down and be done with it. There are incremental kinds of things, and the question is, how rigorous should your intervention be? We began the program with a strategy, one step at a time. Surprise, surprise, we said implementation would be incremental in view of the challenges that we faced and the resources that we had. We also pointed to the need for dealing with this standard setting process and going back and assessing the standards at hand and expanding coverage in the future. We also committed ourselves to transparent policies and procedures. That is, we wanted everybody who had an interest in the outcome of the regulation to be part of developing it. And we also committed to assessing cost and feasibility for any new requirement. So that part of what we said we would do was to figure out whether, in simple terms, whether it was worth doing. And lastly, we committed ourselves to actively promoting the delegation to states. In other words, we wanted to rebuild the state infrastructure that historically had carried the day. A second thing we did was to think about a communication strategy. We're a small program. We had a whole world out there that we need to explain to them what the rules were, and we also wanted to keep them involved in the program as it developed over the first few years. We identified as key stakeholders, and some of these may surprise you. First of all, EPA's regional staff, because they were the people on the front line. They were, for the most part, public health service officers that had worked with the interstate carrier program. They were the knowledge base that we had to deal with. They had good relationships with the states because they had worked with them on a collaborative basis for many years, and they were essentially our eyes and ears in the field. The second group we obviously needed to deal with were the state regulators. I'm sorry. The other people that we were concerned about obviously were the industry, and we thought there our best bet was to deal with the trade associations, SDWA and National Association of Water Companies. We also needed to keep in mind the concerns of the environmental community, who was very active in getting the legislation enacted and very aggressive in pushing us to do everything instantly, and with the general public. And then finally, the congressional staffs. At that point in time, unlike today apparently, the Congress that enacted the legislation held regular hearings and had staff devoted to seeing how we were implementing the program. There was a point in time I remember turning to my staff and saying, "This guy from the Hill is living in my back pocket. He's getting my memos before I do." At any rate, those were the realities of the time. The early challenges, our priorities as we began the program, were really driven by the facts as we found them. I got the right slide up. Let me push that one more time. I'm not as technically proficient as I should be. Okay. The first thing we did is to take a hard look at the public health service standards. That is, these had been driving the whole waterworks program. And we discovered that they were the product of a different era. They were a product of expert committees. There were no records kept. There was no opportunity for public comment. And they were in no shape or form comply to the requirements today for due process, for involvement, and for a very clear scientific basis for the numbers that we ultimately got picked. The second thing that we discovered was that, and this was really an analytical chemistry phenomenon, there had been a breakthrough in '75. An application of GCMS technology enabled them to identify organic chemicals 3 orders of magnitude lower than had previously been the case. It's like opening a window and looking and seeing there are a lot of other things. And for the limited initial data that was collected, the most troublesome contaminant were the trihalomethanes that included in that group of chemicals that were perceived of as carcinogens at that time, which is, you might imagine, was quite troublesome to some of the critics, that there were bad things in there that we hadn't measured before. But in fact, the analytical technique was a research technique. It had been applied in universities. Nobody in the regulatory, I'm sorry, none of the utilities really had much capability to do that kind of analysis. So the first two things that we launched were national surveys of statistically meaningful surveys of drinking water quality, applied the new technology, and got what little data we really had to begin the program in terms of the unregulated contaminants as they existed. We also, again, a priority being to promote delegations, began working with the states. And one of the first things we discovered is the states, and a lot of this was size, that is, the drinking water program defined a public water system of something with 25 or more people being served. Most of the states did not have programs that went down that far. There was also a technological break, that is, most of the inventories that did exist were on paper and hopelessly out of date. And so we launched a large technical assistance program to the states to build computer-based systems to collect data and for the first time to get a real handle on the universe that we were trying to regulate. As part of that, because the analytical stuff became so concerned, we tried to take a look at lab capabilities, and they varied all over the place. And so part of what we were going to do with the states is try to upgrade lab capabilities so that we had a consistent basis for future information. And obviously, the states needed much more in the way of resources if they were going to rebuild significant oversight programs. And we were also concerned that they needed to build in their growth the scientific capability to do risk assessments, to do site-specific risk assessments, where you can begin to get a sense of what's wrong and what you can do about it. If you think about this, one other item that came out of the survey, the work on inventories, was the perception of the small system problem, which I think you were all familiar with. Most people in the United States get their water from a small number of very large, well-managed systems. Most of the systems are tiny. Many of them do not have professional managers. And so as we began the program, we realized there was a need for some strategies beyond just treatment to try to get the small systems to meet the standards and to improve the quality of water that they were serving. And here, and there's someone from the Rural Water Association present here, but one of our early activities was working with the Rural Water Association, who had programs of circuit riders and programs to promote consolidation, and looked at institutional ways of improving the quality of the water at the tap, since treatment was not going to be a simple approach. If you take that list, from our perspective anyway, that was a pretty daunting set of tasks that we had to deal with, and lots of information that we suddenly began to realize we needed but did not have. And yet, despite this, we were able to get an extraordinary level of enthusiasm and support out of the EPA staff. At that point in time, you could tell the drinking water, if you went to an EPA meeting, you could tell the drinking water guys and gals, because they were very enthusiastic about what they were doing. They saw their program as a major public health initiative, and it was a very happy time to be in the program, even though everybody was very busy. Yep, let that work. I'm trying to get to, no, I'm trying to come back. I'm trying to get to the slide that begins with delegations. It's about the 5th slide. 7, 6, 5. No, go one more back. There you go. Go one forward. Never mind. All right, I'll pick up on the slides. The point on the delegations was this, the original legislation provided grants to the states. However, to maintain your eligibility for the grants, you really had to qualify for delegation, which we called primacy. That became quite complicated because it meant that your rules had to be, in the opinion of our lawyers, the equivalent of the federal requirements. So you had to go back and change state laws in some instances and state regulations to deal with the difference in coverage, to deal with differences in reporting and record keeping and the other provisions that the Safe Drinking Water Act was quite specific about. Again, that was the heart of the upgrade. The In our case, we were very successful. That is, of the 57 states and territories that might have qualified for delegations, we actually got it done in 52 states in the first couple of years, which we viewed as a major accomplishment, and it did create the institutional framework we have to this day, in which the states play a very vital role in the drinking water programs. Now, let's see if I can get to the next slide. Damn. No, let's go back one. Okay. In standard setting, the statute had a very specific set of activities for us to follow, which we did. The first step was that we were to come up with interim regulations that were essentially an update of the 63 Public Health Service standards. That part of the task was straightforward. The utilities, everybody had seen those regulations before, and so that went down without much of a fuss. The second step was that we were required to fund a major study of contaminants in drinking water that could be harmful, conducted by the National Academy of Sciences. And the third step was the Congress expected us to come up with revised regulations based on the Academy study. And as a matter of fact, there's a provision in the law that said within 100 days of getting the report, we had to propose the next generation of standards. Surprise, surprise, in the actual world, it didn't exactly work out that way. As I say, the first step was easy. The National Academy of Sciences study took 2 years to generate. It produced a 980-page book. It had lots of information about contaminants in drinking water that might be harmful, but we had already regulated most of them. And it didn't have the specific kinds of information that the Congress, I think, anticipated. Here are a specific number of organic chemicals for which standards should be developed, and all the other information you need to know to create a standard. You have to know how to measure it, you have to know how to treat it, you have to know feasible ways of dealing with it. So that left us, as we moved towards the next generation of standards, to deal with the only information that was available, which essentially was the results of the 2 big monitoring studies that we had done with the new analytical methods. What those studies showed us was, one, that for virtually every system that used chlorination, that they were detectable levels, some of them quite scary, of trihalomethanes, including carcinogens. The second part of those studies showed us that organic contaminants were kind of randomly distributed. They didn't look to be too large, but they had no patterns to them, and so we didn't have a specific way of zeroing in on the utilities faced with those problems. In actuality, can we get the next? Whoop. Yeah, okay. So in 78, Joe's here, he can tell me. We proposed a group MCL, in other words, for a family of chemicals, and we based that on mathematical models of potency. And again, the use of mathematical models for the carcinogens was the most valuable piece that was in the NAS report. It enabled us to answer the question we started off with: how are we going to set standards? What's the science policy to be? With the imprimatur, we had been working on it inside the agency, but the NAS gave us an external imprimatur, which enabled us to get through the review process, because we were basically pushing standards on a basis that nobody had seen before. At the same time, we proposed a GAC treatment technique. Now, I was in this room about 5 minutes before 3 people landed on me over GAC, so I don't want to get into it here. I'll take it on anywhere we can. But fundamentally, what we were hoping to do was to build a barrier on big systems on dirty rivers that would reduce the likelihood of other organic contaminants, waste-related, getting through to the finished treatment works. But what the public comment period revealed was, one, an awful lot of people didn't want to do that. Secondly, that there was a contentious and vastly extended public comment period. We got thousands of comments on the proposal. At the end of it, the agency decided to drop the the GAC proposal, mostly because we didn't know enough about surface chemistry. We didn't have a clear trigger for regeneration. We clearly couldn't do a very precise job of estimating the costs and benefits of what we were trying to deal with, because we were looking at whatever would be flowing down the river, and it would be very uncertain about what would be present over time. At any rate, that then left us with, well, back to the standard setting process. So we picked a couple of families of compounds. The volatile organic compounds was the first group. Again, we went for a group kind of MCL and worked that through the process. Unfortunately, with the new standards for what it takes to put a regulation in place, the process was slow. There was an awful lot of criticism about, well, why aren't you doing more? And that was the position that we were in, saying, well, with the information that we have, here are the standards that we can put forward. In terms of the THM reg, though, that turned out to be much better than, or much easier than we had thought. That it turned out with, by some modifications of the point of application of the disinfectants, and a little better controls on the plants themselves, getting more of the turbidity out before you disinfected it, you could obtain significant reduction in THMs. And over the next year or two, I think the utilities got way ahead of us in figuring out how to do that effectively. But that's kind of where we were. All right, let's see if I go one more. Okay. Again, back to our how high to jump issue, it became clear to us that we needed better tools. The formal regulation would take forever to get through, and so we invented a system which we called drinking water health advisories. And what these were meant to be, I'm sorry, the lead on this is in the late 70s and early 80s, you may remember the world became very, very concerned about the hazardous waste disposal practices, or the lack thereof. That led to Congress. There were daily headlines about contamination here and Love Canal there, and a bunch of other kinds of risky phenomena, some of which had the potential, at least, of getting into drinking water sources. And so Congress actually enacted Superfund and amended the hazardous waste management law. And so that left us with, as I started to say before, the notion that we needed to provide authoritative information about the potential adverse health effects of contaminants in drinking water, both short-term and longer-term, so that on a site-by-site basis, competent scientists could look at that kind of information and do a risk assessment and decide the answer to the question we posed earlier, how high to jump. Is this something requiring shutdown, immediate intervention? Is this something in which the risks at the margin appear relatively small, and so we can engineer changes that may take some time to implement? This approach became very useful. Turned out that the states and the other folks dealing with, including the EPA people dealing with Superfund sites, found this technique helpful. And so we, in fact, have greatly expanded them. I believe at the moment, if you look at the EPA site, there are some 200 chemicals for which there are health advisories at hand. And that leaves me kind of to try to sum up here, at least as where the looking for the very last slide. Okay. This, of course, constitutes my opinion. I'm not sure that everybody will share it. But we certainly didn't get it all right the first time around. We had lots of issues we dealt with the information at hand that turned out not to be right later on. But I think we did have significant impact. That is, we certainly developed the basis for regulating carcinogens that was accepted by the scientific community and withstood court challenges, and that was a new phenomenon. We certainly, our activities resulted in a significant increase in the amount of utilities that were actually doing the monitoring, which is what you want if you want to ensure that safe drinking, that the water you drink is safe. We also, in the process, we in the states, in the process of oversight, significantly raised compliance rates. And that particularly important among the middle and small size systems, which according to the Community Water Survey in '69 weren't doing much of monitoring at all, but that gap was closed very quickly. And we also saw a reduction in the number of reported drinking water-related outbreaks. The types of things that CDC follows and tracks and reports. At the same time, over these same years, I think the industry made significant progress. And the things that I would particularly cite, or I thought were particularly important at the time, were one, people from the industry got involved with regulatory development practices at the front end, inside EPA and at the state levels. And I think that made the standards much more workable later on. Trade associations became involved in the legislative process at the Congress and state levels. Among other things, that gave us the state revolving funds, which are the only external help currently available for infrastructure improvements at medium and small type systems. They certainly enhanced the professionalism of the waterworks management because suddenly they needed to learn more about processes and new technologies and new applications of technology. And then finally, which perhaps went most unnoticed, was the utilities began funding independent research on drinking water issues through the AWW Research Foundation, which is now renamed and is the biggest institution in the world doing drinking water-related research. At any rate, it seems to me that over the years that I was there, if I had to characterize it, I'd say what a lot of things happened, a lot of work was taken care of. Certainly much remains to be done, and I thank you for your attention.
Oh, what a wonderful start to our celebration with the administrator's very inspiring keynote to kick things off. Vic, for your great history, the implementation, all the hard work that went into this act that we are here to celebrate today. Jim, I know you're on here still someplace. You're great kind of putting in context for everything we're doing. As you're sitting up here and I was looking at your presentation, I'm wondering if 2,000 years from now, some success of yours at Duke is going to have a little stick drawing of you with your book up here talking about back in 2014. It probably won't be a stick drawing on a PowerPoint at that point, but we'll see. So I'm Michael Dean. I'm Executive Director of the National Association of Water Companies, and it's my honor to introduce and to moderate, very lightly moderate, since we're not going to have time for discussion or questions, but we got some great panelists. And today, as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, I know we're all mindful of the privilege that we have daily to access some of the world's safest drinking water. And this is a monumental achievement by any measure, but to be able to make the same claim 40 years, 80 years from now, as Administrator McCarthy mentioned, means facing new challenges together. And we're facing challenges including aging infrastructure, increasing water quality and public health requirements, environmental and climate factors, as well as the need to make substantial investments to address these challenges, which in turn leads to the next big challenge of trying to communicate the increasing costs to the customers that need to pay the bills to continue to receive the services that they rightfully expect. But I'm confident that every person and organization in this room today can join me in recognizing that there is no water infrastructure or water management challenge facing us today that doesn't already have a solution someplace. Each organization we're about to hear from may be different in terms of how we carry out our mission, but we share the same challenges common to all of us in the community of water professionals, and very importantly, we share the commitment to fully meet these challenges. As the thought leaders in our industry, it is time to come together, speak with one voice, agree on our core messages, and work with our members and customers to shift the national conversation from the challenges we face to the solutions we can deliver. The solutions exist today, the expertise exists today. However, no one segment, association, utility, or company in the water industry can alone solve the water infrastructure problems across our country. Just like the invisible network of pipes that deliver water to our people throughout this country, we are all connected. As Administrator McCarthy wonderfully made clear, let's deliver these solutions together. Let's work together in a coordinated and collaborative way, learning, listening, and encouraging the best from one another. We have an extensive and very experienced panel this afternoon, so let's get underway with the next phase of our celebration. In the interest of time, each speaker is going to come up and identify themselves and their affiliations. And with that, first, Chuck Murray.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Chuck Murray, General Manager of Fairfax Water, just across the river in Virginia, and President of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, better known as AMWA. I'd like to start by welcoming any out-of-towners to my city of birth, Washington, D.C. As David LaFrance said earlier, over half of the Americans alive today were born after the implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. I know this comes as a shock, but I'm not one of those. I was born before 1974. But something big did happen in my life in 1974. I got married, so I've had the benefit of the Safe Drinking Water Act all of my married life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate change. And I'm going to echo and reinforce some of what you heard Administrator McCarthy say. So, how, may you ask, does climate change, a phrase that does not even appear in the Safe Drinking Water Act, fit into the statute and to our discussions here today? Well, since the rollout of the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974 and through the amendments of 1986 and 1996, I think it's fair to say that climate change was not at the forefront of drinking water utility considerations. The Safe Drinking Water Act and its amendments focused our attention on important water quality and public health issues. And as you heard earlier, we've made great progress in tackling those challenges. What the Safe Drinking Water Act, and particularly its amendments, also gave us is an adaptable framework that we can use to our advantage as climate-related issues jump to the forefront of water utility operational and planning considerations. Too much water in the east, too little in the west, rain where there used to be snow, raw water quality challenges caused by extreme weather events, both floods and droughts, sea level rise, warming waters, associated problems such as toxic algal blooms, are all issues that water utilities have had to address in the past. The difference is that due to climate change, water utilities are seeing an acceleration of the frequency, severity, or rate of change for these issues, thereby making the job of a drinking water provider even more challenging. Today, climate change is one of the predominant topics of conversation in the water industry, especially through our associations, such as AMWA. In fact, AMWA is planning its second International Water and Climate Forum for December 2015 in San Diego. For the past several years, most utilities like Fairfax Water have been observing changes and struggling to improve our understanding of the science of climate change and to help predict water quality and quantity impacts, and to bring this information into our capital planning processes and our utility operations. This process will enable us to prepare and adapt to climate impacts and become more resilient while continuing to meet the public health protection standards of the Safe Drinking Water Act. So, what do we need to do going forward? Whether developing new regulations or revising those already on the books, we, both the regulators and the regulated community, need to fully leverage the flexibility inherent in the Safe Drinking Water Act. New regulations must allow for innovation, giving options for compliance across a wide spectrum of challenging local conditions. As utilities continue to adapt by using all available sources of water to treat and meet the needs of their communities, regulatory flexibility and adaptability will be increasingly important. The Safe Drinking Water Act's 6-year review process provides a perfect opportunity to look at existing drinking water regulations and make adjustments to adapt to climate considerations while continuing to protect public health. In short, we need to make sure the effects of a changing climate are taken into account as we embark on the next 40 years of the Safe Drinking Water Act. That act, as well as the Clean Water Act and other statutes, will play an increasingly important role in the protection of our water resources. EPA in particular must continue to work closely with stakeholders like me, as well as with federal, state, and local agencies to ensure the regulations, guidance, and other products developed in support of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act recognize and incorporate the realities of climate change. This needs to be done not as an afterthought, but as an integral part of the regulatory development process. So in closing, as you reflect on the remarks from earlier this afternoon and listen to the speakers that follow me, I encourage you to think about how adaptation to climate change fits into these discussions. And if I had a glass of water, I would raise it and salute the 40 years of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Taft. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. We represent the drinking water programs in the 50 states, the 5 territories, the District of Columbia, and the Navajo Nation. I'd like to focus my remarks this afternoon on emerging contaminants and the demographics of the universe of water systems that provide safe drinking water for us every day. Our Virginia State Drinking Water Administrator, John Albach, will share with you in panel 3 some state drinking water perspectives on source water protection, built and human infrastructure, and partnerships. So you'll get an overview of state perspectives on a variety of issues. So thinking about emerging contaminants and drinking water regulations, I think it's probably fair to say that with the regulations that address over 90 contaminants and contaminant groups, we have a very strong framework that provides confidence, I think, in the water that we drink every day. So we have a great starting point going back to the work that Vic Kim and his staff and others did back in the early days of the Act. But there are also a lot of emerging contaminants. We had, with the advent of the concern about personal care products and pharmaceuticals a number of years ago, just a lot of concerns about emerging contaminants and our ability to measure at very low levels a number of contaminants. And so to what extent do we need to be concerned about those? And do they require regulations? Are some of the principal questions I think that we face. One of the great features, we think, of the 96 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act was a framework for sort of sorting through those issues and the development of something called the Contaminant Candidate List, which essentially looks at occurrence and health effects to make judgments about the regulations that, the contaminants that perhaps should be moved forward for regulations versus those that perhaps regulations are not needed, or a health advisory or some other action is most appropriate. So I think the challenge going forward is sort of majoring on the majors. Of all of the things potentially that we could be concerned about, where do we need to be focusing our time and efforts? And it really comes back, I think, to good occurrence data and good health effects information. The latter piece of that is probably the bigger challenge. Getting good, reliable, actionable health effects data is just a very challenging undertaking. And that is an instance where having health advisories, as Vic mentioned, is a very nice kind of interim step or something that we can rely on where we don't yet have a regulation. States appreciated the 2010 strategy that the then Administrator Jackson announced. that had a number of elements. It talked about regulating contaminants or groups of contaminants in classes or categories, and we think that's a very sound practice. In fact, it's been done with disinfection byproducts, radiological contaminants, and some other instances. So I think if we have the right group, that is a very efficient way going forward. But there was actually another part of that strategy that we thought was extremely valuable, and that is kind of getting into this whole subject of source water protection. We cannot regulate and address everything that kind of comes into sources of drinking water. It is best addressed at the source, and so we need to be leveraging other authorities, other statutes, other partners to address safe drinking water before it actually gets to the treatment system. So one of the things that you'll hear my colleague John talk about in panel 3 is the call to action that actually the administrator mentioned, which is a recommitment to leveraging all of those other authorities, working in partnership together to protect the source. I'd like to talk for a minute or two also about another challenge we face, and that is just kind of the demographics of water systems. There are, depending upon your count on any given day, 155,000 thereabouts public water systems, about 50,000 community water systems, and the rest would be non-community water systems. So a lot of water systems to address, and most of those are small, serving less than 10,000 people. And so a lot of challenges around those issues. Those systems are not inherently problematic, but they do have particular challenges in terms of attracting the human and financial capital sometimes that they need to really make a go of it. And so states and technical assistance providers spend a lot of their efforts working in partnership to shore up the technical, managerial, and financial capacity working with water systems. A part of that as well are partnerships between water systems, trying to look for opportunities where systems perhaps can share technical and managerial capacity, and indeed sometimes even physical consolidation. So a lot of challenges there, and I think our colleagues at the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and the National Rural Water Association will have more to say about that. So I think I'm going to leave it there and turn to our next speaker, which I think is Oral Arndt.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Oral Arndt. I'm the CEO of Lehigh County Authority, a water and wastewater service provider in eastern Pennsylvania. I also chair the American Water Works Association Water Utility Council, which deals directly with many of the Safe Drinking Water Act matters that come before our association. Given the season, my comments today will borrow from a well-known holiday story. While there are many aspects of the Safe Drinking Water Act, my comments will focus on drinking water infrastructure finance, past, present, and future. No ghosts, just realities and expectations. Considering water services the most capital-intensive of all utility services, it is clear that low-cost, adequate financing is critical to providing affordable, safe drinking water. Since the advent of tax-exempt bonds in 1913, the lion's share of water system improvements have been financed with that tool, actually up to 70 to 80% annually over that time. More recently, starting in 1996, the drinking water state revolving loan funds were created to assist in financing drinking water infrastructure, especially the improvements that were necessary to meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act itself. Through fiscal year 2013, over $28 billion of drinking water infrastructure has been financed through the SRFs. Although these two past and present drinking water financing tools continue to be available, of late they are seriously threatened by federal concerns about the budget, debt, and deficit. In June of 2014, Congress authorized the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, a new drinking water funding program to complement tax-exempt bonds and state revolving loan fund sources. The kickoff of the WIFIA program, however, awaits a federal appropriation to proceed with that program. In order to continue the progress that has been made under the Safe Drinking Water Act and to address the growing challenges faced by the drinking water industry, particularly including replacement of our aged infrastructure, it is important that the existing tax-exempt bond and SRF financing tools be preserved and the new WIFIA program be funded and implemented. If we don't do that, I fear that the future of safe drinking water, high-quality service, and affordable service that protects public health, provides community safety, and supports a vibrant economy will become exceedingly difficult, if not impossible. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Charles Hilton, General Manager of Breeza Hill Water and Sewer Company, and I'm President of National Rural Water Association. Now, last night while I was reading the Washington Post, I read several articles dealing with the survivors of December the 7th at Pearl Harbor. I thought to myself that in spite of the horrific hardships these brave men and women experienced on that day, their individual and collective hardships, suffering that they went to, they truly experienced history in the making, and they looked at the future of this country and the direction that it would go was set upon that day. I thought of my own career, and while it in no way approaches the life of these brave soldiers of many years ago, I realized all of a sudden that I was there when the Clean Water Act was implemented. I was there when the Safe Drinking Water Act was implemented. And I have experienced events that have had profound effects on the health and safety and lives of American citizens in my own generation. And likewise, these events will continue on to affect Americans for many years in the future. 40 years ago, it was said, "Nothing is more essential to the life of every single American than clean air, pure food, and safe drinking water. This legislation will enhance the safety of public drinking water supplies in this country through the establishment and enforcement of national drinking water standards. The Environmental Protection Agency has the primary responsibility for establishing our national standards. The states have the primary responsibility of enforcing them and for otherwise ensuring the quality of drinking water. During the crafting of this legislation, I opposed extensive federal involvement in what has traditionally been state and local regulatory matters." That speaker was none other than the 38th President of the United States, President Gerald Ford. In his signing statement of that act in '74, President Ford emphasized that the most important precept for the Safe Drinking Water Act to actually work was the concept of partnerships. This was partnerships beginning here in our nation's capital. It was extended throughout and intermeshed with our 50 state governments. And it ended in a place called Breeza Hill Water District, a local community that does not even exist on the map. It's a place in rural South Carolina. The National Rural Water Association represents some 30,000 of these rural water districts. Some are so small that they are governed by volunteers, and they're also operated by unpaid volunteers. Some are large enough to have professionals who lead the industry in technical, professional, and operational skills. But all 30,000 of their membership are committed to one thing. They exist to protect the health of their representative communities by providing the safest water possible, all of them. Originally, I had written in this that for the truly small systems, and even for systems the size of mine, our challenges are enormous. But then I realized that was not a really true statement. It's not only for the small, the medium-sized systems, it's for every water system in this country. The challenges are huge. 40 years ago, preparedness meant having the proper repair clamp on the shelf for all the sizes of pipe. We still have repair clamps for all the pipes of all the sizes that we need. But it goes far beyond that because that's the easy part. Now we're faced with Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. We're faced with climate change. Today it's a drought in the West. Tomorrow it will be flooding in another area. We do not know where and how we will face these challenges. Buzzword today in Washington and throughout our country is security and cybersecurity. For our small systems in rural America, first we had to go in and define what these terms meant. They did not realize the problems that we have in those fields. As I travel across this great nation, and as I look out on this office and this area, I see a lot of gray hair, much like mine is becoming. I don't see the young people coming into this industry that we need, the young professionals, to overcome the challenges of the future. But again, by working together through partnerships, through federal, state, and local collaboration, maybe something that we did through the Source Water Collaborative efforts, we will overcome every challenge that we face. We've created a new vocabulary in this industry. NIDWACs, FACAs, CPACs, agreements and principles, all aimed to increase joint participation in this process from the local to the federal level. My association is grateful to EPA for making our job sometimes bearable. I looked at the EPA website, and from their own website and in their words, EPA is committed to giving small systems the financial and technical resources they need to provide safe drinking water now and in the future. But the partnership goes much further than the federal agency with EPA. It goes to other federal partners such as USDA, who has provided billions of dollars of funding to make infrastructure possible throughout this nation, extending new water companies and new water lines into areas previously unserved. We go to our state primacy agency, where each of us at the local level has our primary working relationship with. And then through all of these partnerships, National Rural Water Association personnel are in 200 community water systems each and every working day, helping support those systems who are unable to meet the challenges. In closing, I'd like to thank all of my colleagues in this room, what they represent to our profession, but most of all, what you represent to improving the lives of all Americans. President Ford also said in '74, I am pleased to say that we are moving ahead to confront those new problems threatening our water supply. 40 years later, we're still moving ahead. We have not met all of our goals, but because of all of the individuals in this room, we will meet those goals in the future. Like so many of the soldiers in World War II that we paid recognition to on December the 7th, perhaps the real unsung heroes of today may be the thousands of operational specialists across this great nation who ensure that your water supply is safe and it's always there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Walter Lynch, President and Chief Operating Officer of Regulated Operations for American Water. I'm also honored this year to serve as President of the National Association of Water Companies. So I'm proud to be representing both NAWC and American Water here today. Founded in 1895, the National Association of Water Companies has members today throughout the country, ranging in size from large companies owning, operating, or partnering with hundreds of utilities in multiple states to individual utilities serving just a few hundred customers or less. Public and private utilities have played an important role in the shared responsibility of federal and state water quality standards from the beginning. Over the years, our members have worked closely with the EPA and other agencies to ensure that safe drinking water remains a priority in our country. So I'm also proud to represent American Water, the largest water and wastewater company in the United States, publicly traded. Our 6,600 employees provide drinking water, wastewater, and other related services to more than 14 million people in more than 40 states and parts of Canada. So each day of our lives, we rely on safe, clean water. When we brush our teeth, bathe, put ice cubes in a glass, or drink water straight from the tap, we know that the water will be safe and clean. For that, we can thank the water utilities, regulators, and legislators who work together to conceive and implement the Safe Drinking Water Act. The fact that safe, clean water is expected and even taken for granted in the United States is largely because of the reliable access to clean water during our lifetime. But for that to continue, we all know the significant investment has to be made across our industry and across our country. The EPA notes in published materials that drinking water that is not properly treated or disinfected, or which travels through an improperly maintained distribution system, may also pose a health risk. Now, this statement is important because it spotlights both treatment and the distribution system. The treatment encompasses disinfecting water that can contain anything from pesticides to harmful viruses and more, and that could have disastrous consequences if properly maintained water filtration plants were not in place. This is a critical part of fulfilling the promise of the Safe Drinking Water Act. The distribution system in the United States encompasses 2.8 million miles of water and wastewater pipes that lead to and from our homes, businesses, and schools. Updating and maintaining our water's aging infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges that we face in the United States in the years ahead. The cost of replacing and expanding our drinking water infrastructure is estimated at $1 trillion over the next 25 years. Significant investment. And that number could grow if we delay action. That's why members of NAWC, the National Association of Water Companies, regularly invest in the communities they serve by updating outdated treatment facilities and infrastructure to making sure the water from your tap continues to be healthy and safe, and by meeting and exceeding those standards. According to new research from the Water Research Foundation and the Water Environment Research Foundation, 30 of the large public utilities from around the country will invest $223 billion over the next decade and generate more than $500 billion in U.S. economic output. The private sector is also aggressively investing. NAWC estimates that its 6 largest members, of which American Water is the biggest, are collectively investing about $2 billion each year in their systems. And these 6 companies provide service to about 6% of the U.S. population. American Water alone invests about $1 billion in our water and wastewater infrastructure every year. And over the next 5 years, we're going to be spending about $5.4 billion upgrading our water and wastewater facilities and replacing our infrastructure. And that's a sizable increase over the last 5 years because we recognize the need to continue to invest. But as we invest, we know how important it is to balance the need for this system investment with what the customers pay for the water service. We're doing this by effectively managing our costs so that when we go in for rate increases, it's about the investment in the communities and not about passing through costs. The private sector also continues to invest in water treatment research and innovation. A 2011 analysis of EPA data by American Water Intelligence magazine showed that privately owned and operated water utilities have near perfect records in delivering water compliant with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and for that we're very, very proud of our accomplishments. America's public and private water utilities have historically recognized what needs to be done to improve America's drinking water, and they have met the challenges through new technology, efficiency, and treatment methods. As we look to the future, we need to reinvigorate the spirit of cooperation between the public and private sector so that as new challenges emerge, we can improve and adapt to the future to meet greater needs and demands. Water and wastewater public-private partnerships have proven that they can deliver solutions to the nation's municipalities and close the infrastructure gap in less time. For municipalities, public-private partnerships have the potential to reduce time to complete construction projects, provide more flexibility, enable quicker access to capital, increase access to a broader base of expertise, and again, to introduce new technologies. Public-private partnerships have been around in the United States for more than 200 years. Currently, there are about 2,000 North American communities served by a public-private partner arrangement. These partnerships can be customized to fit local needs, which is one reason why these partnerships have a greater than 85% contract renewal rate over the last decade, and that's according to Public Works Financing's 18th Annual Water Partnership Survey. When the public and the private water utilities come together, there's a higher probability that the nation will be able to take a more aggressive approach to improving our water and wastewater infrastructure, and at a faster pace. A public-private partnership is exactly what it sounds like, a partnership in which the public truly comes first. It's all about local involvement, improving the quality and reliability of a community's water and wastewater system and service to its customers, updating its pipes and treatment plans to handle the growth its area is experiencing, and being a good neighbor in the areas we serve. The challenges in our industry are too great for any one sector, the public or the private sector. Partnership between public and private utilities is essential to ensuring the nation's water systems are sustainable and reliable in good times and bad. This is an opportunity for the best minds in our industry to rebuild and to come together to deliver solutions for the water industry. We have more information than we did when these systems were put into place. This is a chance for the public and private sectors to come together, use new technologies, advocate for public changes that encourage private sector investment and streamline the rebuilding. So the partnership aspect of working together is very important for the nation to solve its water and wastewater infrastructure challenges. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I bet most of us sitting here 2 hours wish we had a glass of water to drink, right? I know as a speaker, you know, I would like one. But anyway, I'll get right in to what I have to say, and I'll try to keep to my script. I think we've all sort of talked a little bit about the accomplishments of the Safe Drinking Water Act that have been tremendous. For my brief remarks, I'd like to mention a couple of ways the Safe Drinking Water impacts small communities. Importantly, the Safe Drinking Water Act means that regardless of how small the community or non-community system, regardless of its location, or even irrespective of the income level of the community, ask and you will receive. Thank you so much. That there's an expectation, wherever you are, that we will have good quality water in the communities. And this expectation applies to all of the rural areas around the country, the trailer parks, the tribal lands, the colonias, all the small businesses and churches and restaurants that all have non-community systems. No matter where we go, and some people always ask me sort of like, well, you know, what do you care about, you know, small community water systems? Even though as RCAP, this is what I've been doing for almost 30 years. Well, all of us travel. All of us have relatives in small rural areas. You know, all of us vacation or maybe want to retire in a rural area. So I think it's important that wherever we are in this country that we have this access to safe drinking water. And by the way, for those of you that don't know RCAP, we're a technical assistance and training provider, been around for actually 41 years, a year before the Safe Drinking Water Act started. And we have 6 regional affiliates around the country that provide services in communities, water, wastewater, environmental, as well as housing and economic development. But so unlike, you know, David started this by saying, you know, unlike other countries, you know, we can drink water anywhere. And I'll try not to digress, but I spent 3 weeks in China in May of this year. And you would not believe the difference in between the drinking water here and the drinking water in China. You know, most everybody there, especially all the tourists or anybody that has any money, buys bottled water. And wherever you go, and we went to Tibet, we went to several different places in rural China, you will see not just thousands, but tens of thousands of empty water bottles everywhere. I mean, they're just everywhere. When we were in Tibet, we were in an area that was heavily irrigated agriculture, and so there's canals that run like 100 miles, you know, up and down from Lhasa. And we would, you know, we would stop and we would talk to some of the farmers. You know, there's no mechanized agriculture whatsoever in Tibet. But they had all these, you know, the Tibetan Chinese government had actually lined the canals, the main canals from where all the laterals were coming off of. And we were there in planting season. And before they actually flood these canals, guess what they have to do? They have to pull all this trash out of the canals, and you look as far as the eye can see, you see water bottles and other trash that are just lined up on the side of the canals. I mean, aren't we thankful that we can just turn on the tap and get drinking water, and we don't have to rely on bottled water? And nothing against the bottled water industry. But anyway, the Safe Drinking Water Act has been successful in identifying and regulating water contaminants contaminants that jeopardize human health and establishing rules for special needs and treatment process, such as the surface water treatment rule, the disinfection byproduct rule, the total coliform, the revised total coliform rule, all these rules. Yet the burden for compliance under these rules falls hardest on the smallest systems that typically have the least managerial, technical, and financial capacity to understand these rules, to develop plans to meet requirements, to obtain financing for improvements, and to operate systems with trained, qualified, and certified operators. The tens of thousands of small community and non-community systems will continue to need training and capacity building assistance to comply with current and projected regulatory requirements. One of the primary components, as we've heard, of the 96 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act was the financing program, the state revolving funds. And small communities have historically found it difficult to obtain water infrastructure financing, especially at levels and rates that are affordable for their customers. The SRF allows states to provide loan subsidies and loan forgiveness to disadvantaged communities, which is just incredibly important for the small communities in this country. The SRF, along with the USDA Rural Development's Water and Waste Disposal Program, that was mentioned recently, also provides, grant and loan funding as well as the community development block grants. And these are really the only sources of funds that provide any kind of significant level of money to do infrastructure improvements and repair, other than a limited customer base that these small communities have. So if the gains made over the last 40 years are to continue, it's critical that we maintain and, in fact, increase investments in programs such as the SRFs that not only capitalize loan funds, but also include critical set-aside funding for source water protection, state program administration, operator training, and small community technical assistance. As some people have alluded to, every study by EPA, American Water Works Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, and others all say that water infrastructure investment must be increased to meet the needs. And of course, these are calculated from anywhere from EPA says, 300 and some odd billion, to AWWA says $1 trillion, and it could be even more. However, it's sort of remarkable that budget requests from the administration for the Drinking Water SRF have gone down approximately $100 million over the last 3 years. These amounts need to increase. Small communities must continue to have access to capital at affordable rates, not only to maintain compliance, but also as an acknowledgement, as we heard the administrator say earlier, that a well-functioning water system is the foundation for the health and economic prosperity in large communities, mid-sized communities, rural communities. This has also been said, but I think we have to say this again and again, and one cause for celebration and recognition in the wake of the 40th anniversary should be directed at the countless federal and state researchers, regulators, outreach, and assistance staff at EPA and the state and territorial primacy agencies that are charged with the implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. These staff perform a difficult job with little recognition of the part they play in ensuring safe drinking water in this country. In addition, the tens of thousands, or really hundreds of thousands, of local utility operators and managers who work every day to bring safe drinking water into the homes of over 100 million households in this country are the real headliners for the day's events. These dedicated professionals work every day, many times under the worst conditions imaginable, at relatively low pay to ensure the public health of all Americans. At RCAP, we usually work with something like 2,000 small communities every year, and I personally have spent nearly 20 years in the field over a 30-year career, and I can assure you that water utilities and small communities have some of the most dedicated, resourceful, and hardest working people you will ever know. They don't want you to come in and fix their problems. They want training, they want tools, they want targeted assistance and access to financing so they can manage their own problems while fully complying with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the many hundreds of trainers and technical assistance providers that work for RCAP, that work for the National Rural Water Association, that work for AWWA, and countless other water-based associations and research universities to provide vital technical and capacity building assistance to small communities. The Safe Drinking Water Act is not just a law, it represents the collective work and accomplishments of thousands of people involved in every aspect of the water utility industry, including community organizers and activists that shed light on drinking water issues. Much has been accomplished, yet much remains to be done, and it will be up to these dedicated women and men, all of us here included, to continue this work for another 40 years and longer. Finally, I think it's important to remember that with all the accomplishments associated with the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, we need to spend more time to communicate with the public. Many Americans have little idea what goes into bringing safe drinking water into their homes and businesses, and EPA and all the groups here today should be committed to bringing the message of the benefits of safe drinking water to everyone. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Thorpe. I'm the National Campaigns Director at Clean Water Action. We are a national organization working at the federal level and in 15 states on a wide range of issues, including drinking water and implementation of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And that's a success of the Act, is that someone like me is standing up here today. So thank you. It's an honor to be here today to celebrate the successes of the Act and share ideas with you in sort of recognition of my appreciation for the Act and hope for the future. I want to issue a challenge to all of us today to put some teeth into what I think of as the first step of the multi-barrier of the Safe Drinking Water Act and of the multi-barrier approach, which is source water protection. We've heard about that earlier today. We all know 3 high-profile tap water disruptions this year demonstrate the importance of source water protection. The call to action being released by the Source Water Collaborative today demonstrates a renewed commitment to protection on the part of diverse organizations. But I think we need to do more. I think we need to use our combined influence to motivate action by players who don't have drinking water as their priority each and every day. You know, we talk at Clean Water Action about putting drinking water first. And it's more than a talking point. For us, it means making decisions about our activities with an eye toward their ultimate impact on drinking water sources. We don't think that's just a smart thing to do for drinking water, thus saving treatment costs and all of that, but we think it leads to better health protections overall. We think it leads to better conservation and protection of natural resources, and to stronger economies and stronger communities, as you heard Administrator McCarthy say. It's a multi-benefit approach. But you know, the decisions about those activities that I'm talking about, those that lead to contamination of our source waters, are not made by Clean Water Action. They're not made by public water systems, and they're not made by the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water. They happen at all levels of government. And you know, if influencing them to make drinking water a top priority were easy, I would be up here talking about something else. Examples of how not easy that are come from the stories we heard earlier today, the reminders of the events this year, so I won't repeat them. But you know, you think about West Virginia, where yes, that was caused by one chemical tank farm that couldn't quite do its job right, but we know that the federal and state authorities that could have helped to prevent such a problem or catch such a problem aren't being fully used. We know government doesn't have the data it needs about chemical properties to respond in emergencies. The coal ash spill in North Carolina, that's a result of a lack of safeguards for the second largest waste stream in our country, second only to our household garbage. That imminent regulation has been a continuing target of rollback attempts. And of course, look at the cyanotoxin issue, where we know that years of federal and state efforts to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus pollution have not yet yielded the reductions that we need. Fundamental gaps in our nation's landmark water law, the Clean Water Act, are difficult to ignore. So it's not an easy task to go upstream and make these threats stop. Again, I think we have to admit that it's time to take a new plug at it. You know, speaking of our nation's landmark water law, the Clean Water Act, integration of just those, our 2 main water laws, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, has been an EPA concern for quite some time. Many organizations here and collaborations like the Source Water Collaborative have also made that a priority. It sounds simple, but it's not. Our priority campaign on the proposed definition of the waters of the U.S., which the administrator referred to earlier, is a putting drinking water first campaign. The streams and wetlands at issue here we think of as part of water infrastructure. They filter pollution, you know, including nutrients, as they make their way to larger water bodies. This sector's concerns about the details of that proposal are important, but they pale in comparison to the opposition that the very fundamentals of protecting streams and wetlands are facing as this rule moves forward. Same is true of another priority Clean Water Act effort for my organization, which is controlling discharges from power plants. that rule faces enormous hurdles as it moves toward finalization, even though this is the largest by far toxic water discharger, including contaminants of concern for drinking water systems in our nation. So I'm up here suggesting that we have not, as a nation, quite found the will to collectively deal with the contamination caused by our activities, including producing food, making energy, building cities and towns, making our products, and that that happens even when the pollution prevention is possible, and in fact, the most efficient thing to do economically if you fully consider costs and benefits. What's the problem with that? It makes public water systems the pollution solution. It passes contaminants, public health risks, and costs downstream to our treatment plants and to the water users in our nation, which is everybody. So my challenge is, can we admit the burden of this pollution and demand solutions? Can we recognize that powerful interests do sometimes evade and weaken regulatory programs, leaving the Safe Drinking Water Act to clean it up? Can we talk about an underground injection control program hindered by a statutory requirement not to interfere with oil and gas extraction? Maybe we can support innovations in the Safe Drinking Water Act. I have an example from my dream world. So if we have enough occurrence and health data on a contaminant, maybe a contaminant that's in common products, and it's ended up on the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule or the contaminant candidate list, both important Safe Drinking Water Act processes, could that trigger action by some other agency, an agency that has to do with consumer products, which of course the Safe Drinking Water Act and EPA do not. I know that's crazy talk, but I'm suggesting to you, I know, but I'm suggesting to you that we may need a little creative craziness if we want to make strides in source water protection over the next 40 years of the Safe Drinking Water Act. When I tell people that the Safe Drinking Water Act is mostly not about protecting our drinking water sources, I get the furrowed eyebrow look. You know, it says safe drinking water. That should be an improvement in the act overall that we can agree on in this next phase. But in the meantime, I do think there's much we can do to influence this country to stop talking about drinking water just when there's a problem and to put drinking water first. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mei Wu. I'm a senior attorney in the health program at the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're a national membership-based environmental organization. And back many years ago, I went to graduate school in another country. And I remember on the first day, I walked into what they called the gyp, or the tiny little kitchen that I had. And there was a sign above the faucet that said, "Don't drink the water." And I was amazed because I wasn't in some small rural village in a developing part of the world where they didn't have access to clean water. I was in Cambridge, England. So standing here today with this opportunity to reflect on the Safe Drinking Water Act and what it's done over the 40 years to improve drinking water quality in this country, I acknowledge it has accomplished a lot. We've come a long way, and we're controlling the presence of a lot of contaminants, 100 some, from pesticides and industrial solvents and heavy metals. And we have some of the safest drinking water on a planet where almost 1 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water at all. And this is a great achievement. But there is a lot more that we can do and need to do. So even with these standards in place, too many public water systems continue to have significant health-based violations, and we need to get these systems into compliance. And EPA needs to update and strengthen a lot of the standards. But it's not just about the regulations that we have in place now. So while there are 100 some contaminants regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act, there are still tens of thousands more chemicals that are in commerce that we don't know about, that we aren't testing or monitoring for, that we aren't regulating at all. Many are used in applications that allow them to have access to sources of drinking water. The fracking industry, for example, is pumping both secret and not so secret toxic chemicals into underground and poisoning some aquifers and threatening many, many others. But the problem is that the process that was put in place by the amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act 20 years ago has effectively halted forward movement on figuring out what to do about all of these chemicals. Just a couple of months ago, EPA announced only the first preliminary decision to regulate a chemical in drinking water in almost 2 decades, the first. And EPA's efforts to regulate perchlorate have stalled for 4 years, blowing through statutorily mandated deadlines. So it's a travesty, really, that this hallmark law has stagnated, exposing the public to potentially harmful contaminants in their drinking water. Over the years, science has painted an increasingly grim picture of what many of these pervasive chemicals can do to our health after prolonged exposure. And the ballooning research on how many of these chemicals can interfere with the proper functioning of our hormones at exquisitely low levels really presents a particular concern for young children and developing fetuses. And so EPA's current pace to address drinking water contaminants is simply not cutting it. Just take a look at the contaminants that are on the unregulated contaminants and the candidate contaminants. It reads like a who's who of problem chemicals. We have perfluorinated compounds, 1,3-butadiene, formaldehyde, and it doesn't even include other important contaminants like triclosan and triclocarban, which are pervasive chemicals in our antibacterial soaps and other consumer products, brominated and chlorinated flame retardants, antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So there's too much at stake to be plodding along with this chemical-by-chemical approach, and it's time to rethink how we protect our drinking water. EPA's efforts at doing the group carcinogenic compounds all at the same time is a good step towards streamlining this process, but again, it's taken almost 4 years and we don't actually have a proposed regulation yet. So the framework for protecting our drinking water needs to change. The administrator has too much discretion to determine whether to set a regulation. We need to lower the barriers to developing the data to support regulation. We need to stop the most toxic chemicals from getting into our source water in the first place or into commerce. We need to make advanced treatment technologies that can eliminate wide swaths of contaminants while also dealing with taste and odor more feasible and more available. So, of course, it's not just one thing or all of these things, it's more than that. And whatever the solutions are, we do all need to work together. Time and again, I see polls that rank drinking water as the top environmental concern among the general public, the very top. And dragging our feet and putting up barriers and focusing on how hard it is or telling people that everything's fine and look the other way isn't going to make it go away. People care about drinking water. And so on this occasion of celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, I think we owe it to both the public and to ourselves to honestly examine all of these problems and to start figuring out how to fix it. Thank you.
My name is Ben Grumbles, and I'm a drinker. And I'm an eater, too, and I am so delighted to be part of this celebration, this significant birthday party. And I'm even more excited to tell you that I'm going to speak for less than 2 minutes, and we're going to go straight into a break. How's that for an applause line? And you can time me. So I just want to thank all the sponsors and the row of champions in the front row, but everyone else. I'm supposed to speak about One Water, and that's not hard to do because we live it and breathe it at the U.S. Water Alliance. Today is that day where we can say one water, one voice, where we're working together. We have clean water leaders with drinking water leaders. And One Water means source water protection. It means reuse. It means all of those things. When the administrator was talking about integrated planning, I don't know if you caught this. She did a brilliant job. She was talking not just about Clean Water Act integrated planning, but bringing in the drinking water sector and the drinking water community. I know that sounds scary, but that's a long vision that really needs to happen over time. One Water also means utilities finding the right way, whether it's consolidation or regionalization, or combining water and wastewater and stormwater utilities for one water in an organizational sense, not just in a water resource sense. And that's something that we're really interested in following, the U.S. Water Alliance. And the other thing I just want to mention is we don't get anywhere as a nation if we don't value water. So the value of Water Coalition, the value of water.org, and one of its campaign efforts, waterworkscampaign.org, are really worth checking out. Just add water and watch it grow, and it will help steer us all towards important action so that the next 40 years is even more successful than the previous 40 years. Thanks to everybody for what a great discussion, panel discussion, Michael for leading it, and for the sponsors. And I think we should just adjourn quickly, Alan, right? Straight to the break. Thanks.
Thank you. I started us off talking about challenges and opportunities. We've heard a lot about that and a little bit of crazy talk. Lynn, thank you. We always need that to be reminded of that. So, yes, we're going to go into break. I think many of the panelists will be around to talk during break. I also encourage you to stay for the reception. You'll recall that the administrator started off this afternoon talking about drinking beer. So I think it's probably good that we cap the day by I'll continue the discussion over beer as well. So please be back at 3:45. We have most of our break available, and we'll continue the celebration.
All right, if we can go ahead and get seated, I'd like to start the third panel. So, I introduce myself. I'm Alan Roberson. I'm Director of Federal Relations for the American Water Works Association here in D.C. I've been working in the drinking water field for about 24 years now and have been involved in the development of a lot of the regulations. When Chuck Murray was here, he talked, I don't see Chuck in the building, he talked about what it was like in 1974, so I kind of reminisce back to my time in 1974. I was a big fan of Quadrophenia and Thick as a Brick. Graduating from high school and going down to Georgia Tech, and I met my wife at Georgia Tech, so didn't get married at the time, got married later, but I had some of the same threads as what Chuck said. So we're going to shift a little bit from talking about the history of the Act and some of the current challenges, and now hopefully maybe try and talk about some solutions. And we've got three panelists, and we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end, and I'm hoping that we might come up with a handful of discrete suggestions that some informal groups could talk about maybe over a cocktail at 5 o'clock or in the future on how we might actually try and move forward with some of these actions and do something that's a little bit more than just having a nice celebration and getting some of the water sector leaders together. So I'm going to do a short bio on each one of our three panelists and then bring them up. They'll do some short remarks and then we'll follow that with Q&A. So again, if you have some questions, think about them and we'll go through that. So our first speaker is Dr. Marc Chevalier. I've known Mark since I started in this job. He's Director of Innovation and Environmental Stewardship for American Water. You've heard about American Water. They're the largest investor-owned, operating in more than 30 states in Canada and serve over 15 million people. This is Mark's short bio. If I read the long bio, I'd take too much of his comments. So he's got a laundry list of awards from a variety of associations, really been a leader in the water sector and personally been very helpful with me in the development of a lot of regulations, providing a lot of the technical and scientific foundation that we used in interfacing with EPA on the drinking water regulations. As Vic said, we've been getting more involved with EPA over the years on the front end of the regulations, and Mark and his colleagues provide a lot of the data information for that. Our second speaker is John Allback. John's with the Virginia Department of Health. He's been the director of the Office of Drinking Water since September 2012. I've been working with John and his staff on sort of a new issue. We've heard about small system challenges, and so in my job I've had quite the contrast in dealing with a lot of large systems, but we've started a new initiative at the American Water Works Association called the Community Engineering Corps. It's a partnership with Engineers Without Borders to bring their engineering expertise from the international arena into the domestic programs. And so John's staff directed me to a small community, Port Royal, Virginia, a town of 80 connections about 80 miles from here, that's really got a water system that's literally falling apart. Every time I go by their elevated tank, I'm concerned that tank won't be there because it's rusted very badly. And so I'm working with the community on how they can get a combination of drinking water state revolving funds and possibly some grants from USDA to rebuild that tank and then to also rebuild the distribution system over time. And so I'm understanding a lot more about small system challenges when you have a town with only 80 connections that already has rates of $35 a month for water only, and how do you try and generate more revenue when you only have 80 connections. So our third speaker is George Hawkins. He serves as general manager of the DC Water. Again, George has a bio that's very long. I enjoy hearing George speak because whenever I'm done, I want to go grab a wrench and do something at a water plant. And fortunately, they don't let me do that because I have absolutely zero experience in operating water plants. I've designed a few back in the day, but have never actually flipped the switch of a water plant. That's probably a good thing. So, Mark, if you take it away, we can start with our solutions panel.
Should we open this, or? Well, thanks. Alan called and he said, Mark, would you like to come and talk at the 40th anniversary of SDWA? And I said, wow, 40 years. That's a real honor. Yeah, I'd love to come and talk on a 40th anniversary. And then I said to Alan, SDWA, and he said, with EPA. And I thought, okay, I got it. And we hung up the phone, and I thought, SDWA with EPA, that must be one of those guys that works with Stig Wrigley. I'm not really certain, but anyway, 40th anniversary of SDWA, we really ought to be celebrating, and 40 years, you're really looking great. So, we really ought to celebrate this. And, 40 years, you really have done a lot. You've done a lot to protect public health. I mean, look at the rates of waterborne disease. They've gone down, independently measured by CDC. And, over 100 regulated, actually, I think it's, if you count them individually, like THMs is 4, it's actually close to about 120. So you've done a great job. 160,000 public water systems. I don't know how you keep track of all of them. Funding for infrastructure, source water protection, surface and groundwater, risk-based settings. You really have been busy. But unfortunately, I understand that your 401k tanked, in the recession, and you still got to work some more. So Alan suggested that maybe I come and give some suggestions, to somebody now kind of retooling their career about what do we do going forward. So I have 3 suggestions for you, Sid, in your, First of all, you got to get hip. So first one, in the 1970s, nobody talked about climate change, but that's all the rage today. And you have to realize, Sid, that climate change is the same as water change. So if you're going to be around water, you got to be embracing climate change, from too much to too little and everything in between. In fact, if you just look back the last couple of years, there's been a lot of really weird weather. From blizzards and floods and hurricanes and tropical storms. My vocabulary with weather has really increased just in the last couple of years. I know what a derecho is, I know what a haboob is, and even a polar vortex I always thought was like one of those furry little white things, but realize that that's really a problem. So, just think about it. Climate's been all around us. Sid, you got to get your arms around this before that climate change comes knocking on your door, or, through the front gate, coming in within a ½ inch of overcoming your walls, or whether you can even find the door, like in this example here where we had record floods way above the flood levels. And so the engineers were smart. They built all the electronics and pumps up on the second floor. Unfortunately, the door was down on the first floor, and so we had to use a helicopter to fly people in to do that. So, you know, Sid, you got to really be kind of thinking about this holistically, or that's assuming you even have a door to go find, you know, in some areas where it goes washed away. So, you know, climate change is something we really have to pay attention to. And, you know, and we think about the cost of those billion-dollar storms have really increased a lot just in the last couple of years and continue to increase. And we think about the challenges around infrastructure we heard, not only the challenges from, you know, $400 million to $1 trillion just to replace existing infrastructure, but other estimates that it takes about the same to make systems more resilient. And so really the issue around the future is getting on making systems more resilient to all kinds of hazards, not just, you know, chemical or threats, but really, you know, our biggest threat to water is Mother Nature. And algal blooms, so we've kind of, you know, heard about that, talk about that. That's going to be an impact of climate change. And certainly 70 years of drinking water with neurotoxins and liver toxins can't be a good thing. So we want to really get our arms around that, as well as the other taste and odor and treatment problems that those things occur. So, you know, climate change really needs to be looked at holistically. And while you have done a great job in looking at contaminants on average, you know, what really drives the climate change is really driving those peaks in contaminants. And many of our waterborne outbreaks are due to peak events driven by climatic effects. So, Sid, really a suggestion, get hip, get out of the 70s. We're not into bell-bottoms and tie-dye anymore. We're all around climate change. Second career advice for you is get networked. In the 70s, you could just focus on drinking water. You could focus on wastewater. But those days are gone. All around career development now is networking. So, Sid, you got to network your activities with other agencies. And one of those is the energy-water nexus. You know, you've been focused on drinking water regulations, and those regulations have actually increased the carbon footprint of water utilities as they go to more advanced treatment with ozone and membranes and UV and more energy-intensive processes. And for water systems, you know, it's the pumps. You know, water's heavy. Your use of energy in moving water, it's all around the pump. So, but it's not just pump efficiency. When you think about that from an energy part, that the power of the pump is related to the volume of water. So, the more that we can do to reduce the water use, the weight of water, we're working on changing that. We're actually dissolving helium to make water lighter. The pump head is the pressure, and the pump efficiency. All of these things can work together. For example, focusing on leaks is not only managing that water resource, but those leaks that allow the water to leak out can be doorways for contaminants to leak back in. So focus your whole attention around water and water infrastructure and leak reduction. Kind of one area that is also pressure management is a way we can think about it. You know, here's an example at night, and you can see that the pressure goes up slightly during the night when the flow of water decreases. Everyone's in bed. So why do we need so much pressure in the water system? That only puts more stresses on the pipe, and where it is leaking, it leaks faster when it's under higher pressure. So I've been looking at some technologies that could automatically reduce the pressure at night. And not only does that allow us to save water, but when we can do this day after day, we can track that water reduction. I'm not sure what happened there. There you go. IT is great. You didn't have that in the 70s either. And we can track that and track the leakage, and we can see that minimum flow at night can be, we can track our progress to reduce that flow means that we're reducing the leakage in the system. So a really holistic approach around water is, and so work with the other agencies, work with the Department of Energy, work with the other parts of EPA on clean water, and have a holistic approach to water management. That'd be my second career suggestion to you. And third, it's about thinking broadly. Sid, in the 70s, you could just focus on water, but we're all around teamwork now, and and working as teams, and so you got to be thinking of water not just as drinking water, but really all one water together. And so that integrated water resource management not only touches on different technologies and programs, but it's thinking of water all as really one use. Who would have thought of in the 70s having apartment buildings in New York City with wastewater treatment plants in the basement, treating that water and recirculating? That's the kind of age that we're in now, and all other kind of applications of reuse. That doesn't even fit in your paradigm from the 70s. That's why it needs to be upgraded, let alone talking about direct and indirect potable reuse. And let's talk about desalination. That's been largely off the radar, but that's not the case for the future. Just one example. Here's the increase in desalination use in Israel. For many years, it was at a low level while they learned about the technology, developed the regulatory programs, understand the applications. And then once you had a few of those systems, it took off. Here's the same graph for Australia, has had that same exponential growth, and in Spain. And so, Sid, you got to get looking ahead and recognizing that integrating all these water resources from reuse to desalination to wastewater is something that is all going to be, you need to get your arm around that and work together collaboratively. So best of luck on the 40th year. You've done a heck of a job. I don't want to scare you, but those are only 3 of a lot of other issues, from scarcity, the emerging contaminants, aging workforce. I don't want to do anything that might put you in the hospital. I want to wish you well and give my regards to my friend Stig at the EPA. So.
I've never met Sid, but I'm looking forward to it. I think I'll be picking up a little bit where, Mark, you left off, and I love how so much of this is intertwining today. Without coordination, I think we're definitely showing a partnership with everything we're doing. In the United States, we're blessed with safe and reliable drinking water. We've been consuming that here today. We enjoy it in sufficient quantities, and it's safe at the tap. That simple statement is a profound observation, especially for an engineer. But if we reflect back on where we've come from as a country, since enactment of SDWA, I've learned a new acronym today, it didn't happen automatically. It was a conscientious and intentional effort from dedicated men and women over many years, and that will continue. Some of the challenges are behind us, but many remain. We rightly celebrate our successes, and we can do that with toasting water later on. But much remains to be done. We can't rest on our laurels, nor should we. I'd like to take a source-to-tap approach, start with source water protection, move to infrastructure, and I'm including both the built physical plant and the human infrastructure, and then with some remarks about partnerships, which is actually where I started. And I think that's the glue that holds everything together. Protecting the source. We need to have a collective recognition at the federal, state, and local level of the criticality of protecting the source is the first layer of the multi-barrier approach, much as our water treatment is, to safe water. There are a host of success stories, and we should laud those, and their effective approaches we can point to that are very encouraging. But again, much work remains to be done. We have an incomplete approaches to source water protection. Collaboration is needed to overcome some haphazardness. Source water protection tools and resources are diffused among different statutes and entities. We lack a cohesive, mandatory approach, thus a collaborative approach employing both mandatory and voluntary elements must be used. We have to look at all hazards as a challenge. Source water protection also means attentiveness to all hazards that we face as those challenges. We need to be prepared for man-made or naturally occurring events such as the climate changes and be resilient in their aftermath. The recovery piece of it and that resiliency is as important, if not more important, than our preparedness and prevention. We've learned much over the past decade. Incident management structures and roles and responsibilities are better understood. They help us to remain vigilant and ready and able to communicate with our partners. Future extreme weather events and challenges is our new normal. Water shortages are no longer solely a west of the Mississippi challenge. We need to continue to creatively address those issues as part of a new normal, a new climate, if you will. We can expect to see increasing use of indirect potable reuse, with some instances of direct potable reuse. And techniques like aquifer storage and recovery are likely to become increasingly common across the country. Although it may be slow in happening, I think it will be common. We also need to encourage and focus our need to be attentive and encourage water conservation as well as leak detection and repair. And the water conservation just isn't tied to a lack of water. It's just good business practice to do so. We have a source water protection call to action. And before I forget, I want to hold up an example of that. And there are copies of this on the registration table outside if you'd please help yourself. The recent chemical spill in West Virginia and the threats posed by algal toxins in Ohio have underscored this seriousness. But being from Virginia, I just can't help but also mention the coal ash spill into the Dan River and the impact that had on Virginians and our water plants there, and our responsiveness to that and maintaining compliance. A silver lining, if you will, from these recent incidents is that they have raised public awareness. I know in Virginia they have. I answer a lot of questions to our elected officials about the criticality of protecting sources of drinking water and the very serious consequences of not doing so. In short, these incidents have created a teachable moment we can always learn that we must seize upon. Nationally, we should capitalize by recommitting ourselves to the critical work of protecting sources of drinking water. The National Source Water Collaborative is a voluntary association of approximately 25 state and local organizations, many represented here today, have developed this short document, the call to action. And I encourage you to pick up a copy and take a look at that. It includes a why now preamble, a vision statement, and key actions that can be used to accomplish that vision. It includes specific recommended actions for all stakeholders for accomplishing it. It includes a background piece to assess current national situations that exist and some tools and resources to assist us in accomplishing this new task. Several key actions include freshening and updating our assessments of source water, drinking water protection. I know in Virginia we're doing that, and my peers in West Virginia are also, and across the country. We must develop and implement new protection plans, work with new partners in this, and then based on those assessments, act. We must practice those protection plans so that we can be preventative and resilient if something happens, and wherever possible, do that. Our aging infrastructure presents a well-chronicled challenge, and we need continued federal support. We've already heard this morning that EPA has documented a $384 billion 20-year need, which is staggering. And other estimates are even higher. In recognition of that well-documented need, we need to continue to fully support the funding for the SRF programs across the country. Over its 18-year history since the 96 amendments, the drinking water SRF programs have established an impressive record of accomplishments in building infrastructure and providing technical assistance through our set-aside abilities to better protect the health of our citizens. Water also needs to be valued at the local level. Certainly, continued federal support is much needed, but outside funding will never keep up with the magnitude of the need and the problem. Drinking water also needs to be valued appropriately at the local level. User rates must generate sufficient funds for sustainable drinking water, utility management, including repair and replacement of the aging infrastructure. There are a host of innovative technology advances in the treatment and distribution of potable water that are at hand and serving us well across the country. We, the states, and I'll speak in particular for Virginia, encourage innovative and appropriate technological solutions, and we have done so recently this past year. But we need to match that technology to the application to ensure it's appropriate to the solution and can be adequately operated and maintained, not just put in place and forgotten about. States desire to be good partners in facilitating the deployment of innovative technologies and look forward to finding ways to expedite and accelerate. And I have to agree with Chuck, who commented earlier about this, that as a regulatory agency, we must be adaptable, flexible, and provide provisions for these innovations to occur. We need to recruit the next generation of water professionals. Someone mentioned earlier there's a lot of gray hairs out here in this audience today. There's not a lot of young, upcoming professionals. That's the same way it is in the water industry and the wastewater industry with respect to our operator staff. They're retiring at an alarming rate, and those positions are not getting backfilled. So we need to focus on these operators. We need to get them to consider this field as a career choice, not just a job, and they need to be presented with information, examples of the criticalness of the work we do for all Americans, for our public health and well-being, and for a strong economy. The curriculum at the high school, the junior colleges, the community colleges, the technical schools, and the college level should be adapted to foster a better appreciation for safe drinking water as a career choice. And we must tap the vast and promising pool of skilled and committed workers among our veterans that are returning home. Our veterans are equipped with many applicable skills and training to enter the workforce as operators, as well as to construct, install, and maintain our critical infrastructure in the water industry and other infrastructure as well. EPA has published an MOS, Military Occupational Skills, to JOB, Job Handbook or Guide, to assist both the vets and the employers at placing them in meaningful employment. And I encourage all the utility employers to hire a vet. Our collective success is also attributable to effective federal, state, and local partnerships. The federal, state, and local partnership and the associated roles and responsibilities laid out in SDWA have served us well. Congress enacts laws and provides funding, hopefully. EPA develops the principal federal requirements and provides overall oversight. States take on the primary role for the program implementation. Local water systems operate their plants and meet the federal and state requirements and communicate directly with their users. It's a partnership across the board. The partnership is growing. Like many aspects of our program, these relationships need to adapt and change. They don't run on autopilot, and they don't run without fuel. They require ongoing communication, trust, and feedback. It's a closed-loop cycle. Dysfunctional partnerships will compromise the overall collective process and ruin the trust and the feedback. Further, Congress's ability to appropriate sufficient funding for both the drinking water program implementation infrastructure is critical and has become a particular challenge in recent years. States are an integral and essential ingredient in our collective success. Some of our key partners may not be fully aware of the key role that states play to shore up the technical, managerial, and financial capacity of water systems where needed, and to provide that needed oversight of their efforts, as well as the essential link between the federal and local levels for them. We build and improve on our partnerships with open lines of communication and early engagement on issues of mutual concern. These are obvious tenets of a good partnership, just as in a good marriage. We need to better understand and respect and value one another's missions. We need to work closely with the environmental and public health communities. We need to be clear and transparent to the public and the environmental public health community what we're doing. In particular, communicate about the important work we do every day to ensure safe water at the tap. We should continue our efforts to provide complete and accurate information that foster public confidence in drinking water at the tap, and communication takes time, effort, and trust. We need to keep our message in front of the people. Because we operate preventive, proactive programs, we're often operating under the radar or just have the expectation when you turn on the tap, water will come out. The urgency and value of what we do is sometimes lost on folks until something goes wrong, when that water doesn't flow. Therefore, we should communicate the critical work we do on an ongoing basis and establish a method of ongoing proactive, positive messaging. Most people in the United States now take safe drinking water for granted. But until the Safe Drinking Water Act, they had no way of really knowing. Through aggressive monitoring and adherence to standards of construction and operation, even the smallest public water suppliers and their customers can feel confident that their water is safe, and if it isn't, that it'll be corrected and they will be informed. Since December 7th and September 11th, our nation has been vigilant to the price of freedom. The same can be applied to our safe drinking water. We must continue to encourage our citizens and consumers to take on an interest in their water, to become educated on the issues surrounding water supplies and the health risks and benefits associated with drinking public water. Thank you.
I got the call as my heart went down because I'd been on the job at DC Water for about 2 months. It was December 2009. Some of you may remember the snowpocalypse in Washington. I lived at the time in Shaw, which is right on 9th Street and R, and we had a water main break. The city was shut down. I walked out to 9th Street, which is usually a very busy thoroughfare through the middle of the city, and it was deserted because there was snow about 3 feet on the ground. It hadn't been plowed yet. So I walked. It was like a horror movie because it was walking through D.C. and it was nobody on the street. I walked up to our Bryant Street pump station where our drinking water folks roll from to this day. And the question was how we were going to get our trucks across town to get to the water main break, which was just in front of 2 hotels used by the World Bank and the IMF for international delegations who happened to be in town that weekend and were now out of water and complaining through their embassies. The answer, fortunately, was that at DC Water we had our own plows, so we created a convoy. We plowed our way out of our back lot where all our trucks were. The plow went down. This is Florida Avenue. So a main strip right down D.C. We were plowing the street with our water trucks going behind it. And then I walked the rest of the way because our crews were the ones who could get in to work. We made it over to 21st Street to see the water popping out of the ground everywhere. When there's a water main break, it comes up wherever the ground has a hole in it. And that, of course, is every stein. Sort of fascinating when you see it because all the little signs, there's water popping up. You realize there's concrete in most places. It's keeping it covered, except anywhere there's a puncture where the water can come through on, which makes it sort of an interesting technique to figure out where the water break is. Because there was water popping up all over the place. And I don't know why I'm digressing on this, although it's just so fascinating, is that the guys we have who do this work, they take this long post. I mean, this would have been something you would have used 300 years ago, and they stick it in the ground and they listen. It's a piece of metal, and what they do is they push it through the hole, they push it down till they get to the pipe or near it, and they can tell by what they hear how close they are to the hole, to the pipe, the break in the pipe. Sort of an amazing, it's like an art. And then the problem was that we couldn't find the valves under the 3 feet of snow to turn off the water to get down to the water main break, which was freezing the street, causing ice for all of our crews. And this was the first water main I had gone to visit, a water main break that I'd gone to visit. I go to them when they happen now fairly often. It's one of the reasons I now wear these. The reason I start with that story at all is that the fundamental premise I have on any of the solutions that we come up with has got to be built on the reality of what most water authorities face. The water main on 21st Street, 22nd Street in New Hampshire, which is this water mains in this area, the newest of them had been put in 1924.
And I was told when I got there, because this was all new to me. I mean, our guys were taking out these books that have all the streets on. We now put this all electronic, but these books that they would be turning the pages that had all the information on it for what was under the street. The pages are all sort of dog-eared and old, and it would give the date when the water main was put in. I said, 1924? I said, yeah, that's a new one. The median age of a water main, this is actually, is median age, and people remind me on my staff what that means. The median age of a water main in Washington, D.C. is 79 years, which means half of them are older than that. What all of the authorities, Chuck, myself, WSSC, anywhere in the country that you go, American Water and all of its facilities face is an infrastructure that was put in when these cities were forming 100 years ago. Maybe at WSSC or Fairfax you've got more modern stuff because the suburbs have come thereafter, although that has brought its own challenges. But for the urban folks, our cities were all built at about the same time. All the systems were put in at about the same time. And we are always hearing stories about all the new things we have to do, which are all good. There's not ever a story that I've heard that isn't a good idea. But they all compete for what our customers want the most from it, which is the damn pipe in the street to work, the fire hydrant to work, the water to get delivered, and the cash money it takes to do a capital replacement project that's something our customers haven't faced literally since it was put in. We have assets that have very long-dated lives. So when you first put them in, say 80, 90 years ago, 100 years ago, for a very long period of time, you're not raising capital funds because the pipes are just fine. Some of them will last another 40 years. It's amazing how long some of these systems do last. So then what you're charging your customer, unless you're used to putting aside your depreciation every year to build up your reserve, which is extremely difficult in the public arena, to take money in and not use it, or not have somebody else use it on your behalf, is you end up paying your operating costs, which are tough enough. So all these years, and that's what your customers get used to paying, is the operating carrying cost until the day of reckoning, which is now you got to replace the capital cost again, something that your customer base hasn't really thought about for 60 years. And now they face the continued operating costs, which, by the way, are going up because of the breaks and problems of an old system, while you're in parallel raising the capital costs to replace it. The only reason I raise that is that the financial reality of that, to me, is frightening. And it's one in the industry we face every day. The good news is we have so many opportunities, and I'll borrow on what Ben started on the one water concept. And I have 6 ideas, all leading to a 7th. And I'll say them quick so we don't go too long. One is this integrating planning. I didn't hear her say this exactly, but when the administrator was up here and she was talking about integrated planning in the context of drinking water, that is a very interesting opportunity. I don't know if you remember Adam and Ken. When we had a program at NACWA, I can't remember the name of the guy who ran the sewer program. We were on the stage, and I was suggesting you ought to include drinking water in integrated planning. My very first project I had when I was an EPA enforcement lawyer was for the Brockton wastewater treatment plant, south of Massachusetts, Boston. And the question was how to reduce copper discharges. And it was going to be extremely expensive for the wastewater treatment facility to do that. When we did a study of it, or they did a study of it and brought it to EPA, their conclusion was it would be far more cost-effective to reduce copper on the drinking water side, because the treatment system, and at the time this all was over my head as to what it meant other than I could understand what they were saying, which is the treatment system being used on the drinking water side was causing copper in some sort of way to leach in than maybe it would have if you used a different treatment system. And wouldn't it be better to spend the money here at much less expense and not have the copper in the water in the first place than wait till it's used in drinking water, goes down the drain, comes to us, gets to the treatment facility, and then we got to remove it somehow at the end. That's this integrated planning notion that in some cases, handling it on drinking water, and as broadly spoken, your crazy idea, which is my second one, of good God Almighty, and I'll use the one that we know the best on drinking water and in what I call enriched water, wastewater, is flushables. Is there ever a worse name for a product than flushables? Because yes, they flush. Lots of things flush, but the sense that consumers get is that they flush and disappear. No, they don't. They get stuck in our systems. We spend enormous amounts of money getting them out, repairing the machinery, resizing it, all the rest, because of something that consumers have been told is flushable and will disintegrate. My humble opinion is that requiring an end-of-pipe enterprise to clean that problem up, rather than foisting it on the consumer side in the first place, is a crazy use of the consumer's money. It's all their money, ultimately. So if we're going to charge them at the end, if I had to figure out how to solve that problem at the plant, and there's tons of these, rather than figuring out how to get it out of the product in the first place, we can save that person money if we think in that context. So I don't think that's not just a crazy idea, it's the best idea, and it makes sense for the consumer in their pocketbook. That's second. The integrated planning of how we can integrate drinking water and wastewater, enriched water solutions across is one. Second is the crazy idea of going back to the consumer. Absolutely. The third is the integrated message. One of my favorite things about this industry is we got the best product ever. And I always say that, but I mean it. Who gets to deliver water to people? People ask me how many jobs you support. You probably all heard me say this, and I always say all of them. There's no building, there's no place, there's nothing that can work without us. Every single job. Nobody, I'm not sure anyone else could say that. Maybe power. But then you say how many living organisms do you support? It's not just people, it's every single one of them. Every living organism on the entire planet relies on us. Who can say that? Both? Nobody. Nobody has a product that supports everything, everywhere, all the time. And you're here, and you've heard from rural interests, and you've heard from big city interests and suburban interests. We have got the classic campaign structure sitting right in front of us. You want to run for president of the United States, you need a national campaign. You got to reach out to the local jurisdictions where you've got all your precincts set, and the best ones have a vertical notion, so there's a common theme, and your message is stick on it, and it's delivered to everyone to their door, and how does it matter to your neighborhood? We're everywhere already, because we've got a water authority of some sort everywhere. If we get a message that is common and repeated and has a national framework but is delivered in how it matters to you in your place, in your neighborhood, we have a priceless opportunity to tell a story about something that everybody cares about. It's incredible. It is right in front of us. The fourth is finance. Finance is literally what I worry about most of all on a daily basis because the numbers are so big. Just look at DC Water by ourselves. We're a classic one water utility because we do drinking water, we do stormwater, and we do enriched water. Our operating budget is $575 million. Our capital budget is $650 million. That's $1.2 billion 1 year. And our customer base in DC, of which many of you are probably, I hope, customers. Thank you. Your customer is king. That we have 138,000 connections. It's not a big city to try to fund that scale of cost. So the kind of financial obligations that we face are enormous. But again, here's what we've got. We've got a product that's not going anywhere. Quite the opposite. It's becoming more and more important by the day. A cash flow that's almost certain at some levels. Yes, consumption has been going down. The amount of revenue we're collecting is a challenge on that front. But there's very few businesses that have a locked-in consumer base, an essential product with a rate-making power with a revenue stream. That means we have essential factors that what I'm told is enormous quantities of private sector money, not the short-term money, the venture capitalists that want a 20% return or a really big, splashy, quick, let's go in, create a company, get our money back, and go on to the next. Longer-term money, pension funds, the funds that have our 401ks in it, where they have liability extensions out as far as they can see. They want to be connected to revenue streams as far as they can see. And we've got that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we all turn over what we do to the private sector, although in some cases that may be exactly what is an option. It's the question, how do we access that pool of capital? Because my humble view is we are permanently now in a world of scarce capital on the public side. It's a permanent attribute. So we're going to need to learn how to access pools of capital and put them to work on the public's behalf in a way that makes a revenue stream for those private investors, but in a manner in which the public can trust. I believe that can be done. And then you start opening yourself up to enormous quantities of money that's looking for a return that they can feel confident in a market that they have confidence with, and I think we have those. The fifth is what I call what I didn't call until today, the right of thirst. I was fascinated by that. I personally believe the weakest, not the weakest, that's the wrong word, the scariest part of running a water utility when you deliver drinking water is your low-income customer. The stories coming out of Detroit, and God bless the Detroit Water Authority, they're trying to get themselves organized. And if they're delivering service and someone owes them money for that service, they need that revenue. That's what we're all talking about, of gaining revenue for the value delivered. In your history, it was free water if it was public, but if you got to build something, someone's got to pay for that. We all understand that. DC Water is pretty tough on going after our customers to make sure they pay for the service we deliver to them. But it is a terrible place to be cutting water off. This is not cutting off cable. It's not even cutting off power. It's cutting off something without which a person cannot live to someone because they're poor. And what my view is, we need an answer on that issue. And I've heard about it, and some of you have heard me talk about this before. I keep on hearing about it, and I'm talking about it without knowing the details of it. But I think it's something called a water limiter. And there's communities out in West that have used it. And we have not done this yet in DC Water, so even though I've talked about it, I haven't figured out how to implement it. But what I understand it is this little gadget that you could put on the water intake to a customer, that if they're not paying their bill, you don't cut them off. You put on the water limiter, and it allows enough water to go by, which you're obviously not going to charge for. If you could keep running the meter and billing it up, but you're not expecting full return necessarily. And it's enough to cook, to flush a toilet, to brush teeth, but not to take maybe even any shower. Just a quick would be. It's not an easy, great world that anyone would want to be in, but they're not going to be at risk to their very health and welfare if we cut off drinking water. Because they're still going to have to get drinking water somewhere, so they're going to go buy it at much greater cost probably, or steal it. I don't know where someone who gets cut off from water, I don't know what they do. I do not know the answer to that. But I think we need an answer to it because it's the right thing. And in my humble view, I would bet if we calculated for DC Water, it's not that much of a cost. Relative to the amount of water that we use to maintain our fire hydrants, because we test them all in water drains, that's not revenue water. When we have a problem with water quality, we'll drain the system to clean the system. We use water all the time we don't charge anybody for to maintain the system. I bet this would be a fraction of that. And yet we would have an answer of the right of thirst question. The sixth is an innovation pipeline. I've said this before, and I believe it with all my heart, and I've certainly seen it true at DC Water. While we're a conservative industry for the right reason, you deliver product 24/7, 365, and people get really furious if it's wrong, and you don't have a lot of extra money in your budget, you can't try things that might work. Because if they don't work and you've sunk money into it, you will have hell to pay to come up with new money to repair what didn't work and figure out something as a replacement. So you tend to go with what you know for the right reason. That doesn't mean we're not innovative. My team every day, since I've sat here, this is a very long time, I came here at 12, I've been here the whole time, I've had 4 or 5 calls about problems that have come up since I've been here, including a council member and 2 customers. And in every one of them, our team deploys and they start problem solving. Our industry is filled with problem solvers because that is the job. And I think it is a management question that is very attainable of how to set up a scheme to start generating innovative projects, piloting them on a pilot basis so you're not changing your whole system so you know it works, so that we're constantly putting in place the innovations that allow us to deliver better service for lower cost, which is going to be the sixth. What all of those things lead to me to is the seventh, and perhaps the toughest but also most interesting nut to crack, which is how to deliver the enormous array of opportunities to the vast number of authorities that need to consider them. I was sort of staggered. I heard this from Dave LaFrance, I think, that there's maybe 50,000 water authorities in the country that serve 10,000 people or less. There's some number like that. And that boggles my mind. 50,000 authorities serving 10,000 people are left. With volunteers, I heard that from one of the earlier speakers, that volunteers do the work sometimes, certainly are running it. Our volunteers work. Joe Catruvo, one of our great volunteers, one of the great leaders of the industry, but he was on our board as a volunteer. But I mean, the staff at DC Water professionals, we're paid for what we do. I don't know how people who are running this, as good and smart as they are, I don't question their capabilities in the slightest, but you're running a tight ship, you've got 4 people, you are the general manager. It's not like me, you ask me how to fix something, I don't know, but I know who to ask, or who to point to, and they'll know how to do it. The general manager of these places were like, yeah, you turn that thing, and that's over there, and oh, I remember we put the pipe over here, and this amount of chemical. They're actually the ones who know how to run everything, because they do. And how that person evaluates of the panoply of options, some of which we've all been talking about, which ones fit, which one makes financial sense. If someone offers a financial deal from an investment fund that may or may not be a good idea, is that the right terms? Am I selling out to a private fund and I'm telling them too much, or am I giving too little? How do you connect this grand scheme of great ideas, whether they're financial, technical, or management, to the players who need to implement them when they're so hard-pressed just to get their daily job done? I think that's and to me, the answer to that was one that we've all talked about as a weakness or a worry in our industry. The head of our Department of Environmental and Technical Services had his retirement party today. Wonderful employee. I'm scared to death not to have him because he's so good. He's retiring, though. And my experience with people who retire is they don't want to go from a 60-hour work week to 0 for very long. Maybe a month later, they're like, okay, I'm ready to do something again. I want to keep active. Not 60 hours a week, but not 0. I only can play so much golf, and I'm not getting any better. I just heard that today, by the way. But the question is, how could we use this incredible resource of people who are retiring, organize them by geography and by type of expertise, and call upon them for a reasonably low cost, because they say 10, 20 hours a week per project, to go out into the areas in which they exist to provide that kind of advice to those hard-pressed professionals figuring out what to do in their local jurisdiction. So we take what's a weakness, turn it into a strength, and deploy that resource so that all the options we've all been talking about can be delivered to the authorities around the country. The conclusion to me is I must say, I started, that story about the snow was December of 2009. I just started at DC Water in October of 2009. It's been an incredible 5 years. I've never seen anything like this industry. I've never seen anything like by the people who work in it, how incredibly dedicated and creative they are. I've also never been more nervous on a daily basis for the challenges we face. On the other hand, the opportunities are there. We can learn from what the Safe Drinking Water Act has done so well over the last 40 years. I think we're ready to go. So thank you so very, very much.
So we're going to shift a little bit now into some Q&A and allow, I'll start one question. We get questions from the audience to someone on the panel. And I don't know, Mark or John or George, the question I had is that we'll start off with is that what's one new technology or new thing we should look at? Mark, you showed the graphs of the pressure. I don't know if that was the Embala software that I'm familiar with or something else. But you know, if you had to pick one thing that we should consider maybe as a tool or solution, what would you think given all the things that are out there? So I'll start with you and maybe work our way down the group.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I said the real interesting part of my job is, you know, it's not every day. It's not even almost every 15 minutes. Staff's coming in with different innovations, and it's really exciting. We showed one, you know, pressure management. I think a lot of the technologies around the distribution system, that's still the kind of the wild frontier. The Safe Drinking Water Act has done a great job in treatment, and we've improved treatment, improved disinfection, reliability. We've done something on source water. I agree that we've got a ways to go on that. We really don't have the tools, so that would be my second one around really giving utilities the ability to manage their source water, because in fact they don't. They're just users of that water like every other industry on a river or what have you, and they don't really have much control. But distribution system is kind of the wild frontier where I think we will see in the next, in the next 20 years, dramatic changes in our ability to integrate information and manage systems the way that we have SCADA systems around our treatment plants. So treatment plants are really quite automated and for a large part can run along. So we actually just had an internal workshop a couple weeks ago, and trying to do that, develop that vision, and it really clicked. A lot of those tools that we have already exist. It's a matter of linking them together and getting more networked. So I'd say it's around all the technology, managing information, informatics around distribution systems so we can operate at a level that we have never done before. We're going to see that revolution in the next 20 years for sure.
May I pass that to George?
Sure. I totally agree, and I'll give several examples on, and I'll use the drinking water side, because a lot of the innovations that I've been more aware of because they're so big are Blue Plains. And in this case, we're trying to follow along, like Fairfax Water is ahead of us, WSSC, but we like to learn from our compatriots and get better. The biggest cost that, not the biggest cost, but a very significant cost that we face, that every authority faces, is when you have a problem with your valves or your water main that's under the street. You've got to dig the street up. It's just a whole laborious process of planning and execution and permits and traffic and all sorts of challenges. And often you're doing it after the problem is hit. So you're also doing it under emergency circumstances, because that day with that snowstorm, I had all these international folks. They actually came outside and were standing, staring at us like we were evil, because their water wasn't back on, and they would come out every 10, 15 minutes. Is it on? Is it on? Is it on? So you don't want to be in that circumstance, because you work 24 hours a day, which is your most expensive money. And I'll give two examples of the kind of technologies that I think are coming. One is, and we're behind on this, but we're now lining pipes rather than just replacing them. And it's sort of this neat technology that you put the system down, and it's this resin. First, you have to clean out the inside of the pipe, so you get all the corrosion that's there, and then you line it, and you don't have to replace the pipe. You get maybe 10 to 15 years of additional life on that pipe in the short run, but it's probably twice as fast. It's much less disruptive, and the planning time is less because you're not digging up the street. That's something we've only used in the last several years, but it's saving us money, and speed to market is fast. The second is a very interesting one on the informatics. It turns out, this is what I'm told, that a water main, before it breaks, vibrates in a certain way, very fast. So if you have a sensor that's doing a recording at every 10 seconds, it won't know this. But if you record 10 times a second, a computer can see the what's the right word? The standard there, whatever it is of what the thing does before the break, and you can get the alert. There's going to be a break on that street in the next week because it's starting to vibrate the way it does before a break happens. And imagine the amount of money and time you spend in disruption to the community when you can plan for a water main break before it happens. That's not expensive technology, I'm told. We're experimenting with it now, but it's something that exists and can dramatically drop the costs of our operations.
I'd have to go to partnerships for source water protection first, and the embracing the folks that maybe folks have shied away from in the past with the environmentalist groups and the Friends of the Rivers, and looking at them in a whole new light as early warning signals. Sentinels out there, if you will, to help us monitor what's going on and observe things, but also to enable community gatherings and getting the citizens and localities involved on the very grassroots level to work cooperatively with the utilities and the state regulators to manage that source water protection. And we're seeing a lot more of that in Virginia, and we're trying to help foster that cooperative climate with that. The other is what maybe it goes along the lines for treatment. If what was once old is new again, and in Virginia we're looking at some innovative technologies, and I'll use that word very loosely because it's not really new and it's not that really innovative. Maybe it's just a regulatory approach that we're taking of using bag and cartridge filtration coupled with ultraviolet and top it off with a little disinfection on very small groundwater well systems that don't have the resources to put in a membrane or a complex system, tie it with some simplified SCADA, some monitoring alarms, and proper operations. Maybe not daily, but the notifications for a remote operator who can come in. And we've just done this on a small industrial complex in Western Virginia to try to assist them through a well contamination event and get in technology they can afford, enable the business to continue operation, continue economic development, and keep people employed.
Okay. Do we have any questions for the audience? Jim?
Thanks. One of the themes that we've heard throughout the day, almost every speaker, has been the capital cost of infrastructure, whether it's $380 billion or $1 trillion. They're big numbers. And what I was curious about is, what does Plan B look like? Right? If that money is not forthcoming, it's business as usual looking out over the next 10 to 20 years. I'm curious what that world looks like to you. Is basically there's going to be increasing pressure on rates to rise? Is this going to be sort of lumpy? I mean, I assume this among the many things that keeps you up at night, George, I assume this is one of them.
I'm not sure it's a great question of, is there a plan B? I think it's all of the above, would be my answer on the multiple choice, which is upward pressure on rates, absolutely. I have a meeting next week with our retail rates committee, and we're going to have the 6th year of my tenure, where every year we've had 2 or 3 times the rate of inflation rate increases. Our customer base who's here knows that because they pay the bills. And that is very frightening. But I think it's the reality in almost every authority around the country. Our rates are going up faster than inflation every year we can see, as far in the future as we can predict. Second, I think innovative financing techniques. Some people have heard about our Century Bond, Green Bond. Denver did a micro bond where people could invest in projects in their neighborhood at smaller denominations to bring in new revenue. They're all of them are going to be necessary. The third is one I'm going to spend next Monday in New York, because I'm going up to meet with big financing enterprises. There is tremendous interest from these big capital pools. It's not the venture or the hedge funds, because they want more quick returns. This is not a quick return industry. But over long term, it's a guaranteed return industry, given fundamentals of what we deliver, is how we can access that kind of capital in a way that makes sense for the public, in a way, and I haven't figured that one answer out yet, not that I'm learning more at this point, but I can't believe that's going to be part of the solution, because the amount of money in these pension funds and in the asset management funds is trillions of dollars, and it's looking for a place where to get some return that can guarantee over time. I think we might be able to offer that and then avail ourselves of a new pool of capital.
Now, Walter Lynch touched a little bit on this, so you had to kind of follow him closely. Well, from American Water, yeah, some of our largest investors are pension funds are looking for that. But our focus around innovation is primarily to drive down our operating costs, because an operating cost is a pass-through cost. A capital cost is something we can depreciate and recover over a period of time. So the rough turnaround is, for every $1 of operating costs we can reduce, we can invest $6 of capital. And so when Walter was talking about the $5.4 billion we're going to invest over the next 5 years, that's driven by reduction in operating costs. And we firmly believe that our focus on innovation is to generate those efficiencies in our operations, like investment in leak detection, so that replace the sounding with technology now that can not only listen for the leaks, but triangulate that between different detectors and tell you exactly where it is. So, and other innovations, in the future, we'll be able to walk down the street with an iPad, and because all that infrastructure will be mapped, and you'll be able to walk it down and see all the infrastructure underneath, the water line, the gas line, and you'll be there. We see that within, those are not Star Wars unreliable. That technology exists. We're working on some technology that can embed in a chip on every piece of equipment, have the safety manuals, operating history, alert you when there's some kind of problem. That technology all exists, and that's all driving us to be more efficient. And why we're driving that efficiency? Because of that need on that capital side, and that's how we're going to pay for that. So that we don't, the customer has a limited ability to, incur the increase in costs. So we have to drive innovation. So we just simply don't put that burden on the customer. It's going to be shared, but it's going to be, we have to do what we can to be more efficient in our operations.
Any more questions from the audience?
I'll just touch real quick on that one also.
We'll get to you, Ken.
We've had experience with the volunteering with very small communities and leveraging human capital against the financial capital. It ties in with the Engineers Without Borders and what is going on in Port Royal, but are hopefully developing there soon and getting forward. But self-help projects have always been in vogue in Virginia, where the citizens in a neighborhood and the community get out and work with the Public Works Department and are actually installing pipe and working side by side to leverage the financial ability to put more pipe in and make more repairs.
All right, Ken, you have a question?
Ken Kirk, National Association of Enriched Water Agencies. Thank you, George. We'll change our name. We're having a lot of discussions through the Value of Water Coalition about messaging. What's the most appropriate, the best message to get out to the public to ensure that they understand how important water is, going forward? Now, obviously, we've made tremendous progress both on the drinking water side and the clean water side. But part of the problem that bothers me is when I hear the report card scenario. Well, infrastructure is a D+. Well, how can utilities spend billions and billions of dollars over the last 40 years, 45 years, and then tolerate being told that their infrastructure is a D+. And some folks, concentrate on, well, we've got these water main breaks every minute throughout the country. That's a horrible thing. But they're fixable and they go away and no one really particularly cares about them. So on the other hand, we have made this investment and it just seemed to me that a more positive message is essential as we move forward. And I just want your thought on that.
My thought on that, thank you, Ken. I like the National Association of Enriched Water Agencies. But my view on that is, in some respects, this is like being a lawyer because I get to argue on every side of the point, is everything everywhere all the time. At DC Water, we'll take any opportunity we have to tell our story, whether it's positive or negative, if it's handed to us. So even a water main break is a chance to tell the story of what's happening and why. I do tend to agree, which is why our logo, our phrase is water is life. That is a positive, we think that's a deeply spiritual comment about what it is we're delivering. And our lead is always, if we have the opportunity, a positive one. So one of our favorite campaigns at the moment is we do water taste tests outside of metro stations and outside of Safeways and giant stores around the city. And people come out of the metro and we have a taste test of our water versus bottled water. And that starts the conversation with people. First, very interesting, more than 60% of the people we have done a blind taste test with says our water is either equal or better than the bottled water. And you'd think on average sense, they're not a huge difference. 60% is ours is better, and then we tell them the price differential between the two. And that starts us in on a conversation about all sorts of other things. So it's a lead in with something very positive. So I agree, Ken, that it's hard not to use the calamities when it captures people's attention, but it's hard to have staying power with calamities. I tend to think you use both. You need to have a positive message, building something that people care about, and then using the calamities to heighten it for when the media is there.
Yeah, one thing that's related to that is that we have this campaign of it's, no water, no coffee, no water, no beer. We had no water, no shower, the soaps that are out there, just to try and show how it touches people every day. And I always imagine, imagine what your office would be like on day 2 or day 3 without coffee. So a bunch of grouches trying to do the work. So it's an important thing that people use every day. So Lisa, did you have a question? Or, oh, I'm sorry, Vanessa. Okay, we'll get to you. We'll get Vanessa and then we'll circle to you.
Mine's different than the messaging. Go ahead.
Speak up and then.
Yeah. Lady in blue.
Let me pass it over. Hang on, Lisa, because just for the webinar, we can get it on the. Yeah. Vanessa, we'll come back to you.
following up on what was said before, what my question is, John spoke briefly about communications. George, you talked about the outreach. But mine is, we've talked about the technical innovations and we've talked about the financial innovations. But have you thought it through the innovations we're going to need in communication and collaboration to get all of these great thoughts and ideas forward and the great story of drinking water and the water profession forward? So not just our traditional channels and, you know, relying on the one message to the public, but how do we overall innovate the way we communicate and collaborate with a wide range of audiences?
Well, I'll start a little bit. I mean, I think, you know, frankly, having Lynn here and May sort of partners that we've dealt with in the past, but maybe outside of our traditional sector partners, having them involved in these conversations is a starting point. But I think your point, it's sort of George's, we got to be talking water everywhere all the time. And, you know, how do we drill it down so we get the best and the brightest, not just to be engineers and scientists, and I can say that because I'm an engineer by training, but how do we get the best and the brightest to be the plant operators and the guys that know how to fix leaks and the guys that'll know how to do that thing with the pipe to find the leak, you know, or use the sensors, whatever it might be. We need the best and the brightest in here. And so we need to drill that down into the high schools, and even I'm thinking, you know, how do you get people in even junior high and below that to understand how important water is? So George or Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, quick, because it's not that I agree or disagree. There's part of this that I think isn't new. Communicating well in a campaign format where you want to get a message across to an audience. You want to have a vertical line where your common theme and an integration of where you deliver it, and that's been done very well for a long period of time. And that structure, I think, hasn't changed much. The technique of delivery has changed. So, for example, at DC Water, I have a full-time social media employee. All that person does, literally 24 hours a day, is deploy on social media. We are at every school we can think of. We take our water. We have a truck that has water that we go to every event we can think of. So the manner in which you are constantly innovating for the delivery at the local level is changing fairly dramatically, but the fundamentals of a good communication scheme with a common message and whatever the delivery points are, putting it on the local level, I think, are fairly straightforward. And I look at the DC Waterworks. I know Radhika's back there somewhere, I think. But with an effort that a bunch of general managers worked with a number of, or WEF and WERF and AWWA and a whole slew, we had a big ticket message about the dollars we're driving, the community benefit on a national basis, and then materials were produced that allowed every local jurisdiction to put in their own specific numbers for their place. That's the classic horizontal, vertical delivery. I think we can do that with water using, one of our favorite ones was we had all of our interns come up with marketing strategies, and they were hysterical. And they spoke to that generation. And it turns out young people do not bottled as in purchased bottled, carrying bottled water almost more than any other generation because they don't want to spend the money for a bottled water. So my daughter, she may do it for environmental reasons because she grew up in my house, but I asked her, she carries a bottled water with her everywhere. And why does she do that? Because it costs so much less to fill it up than to buy another bottled water with money that she doesn't have much of. So we had a whole campaign that our interns did based for that age group with their bottled water. So yes, there's all sorts of innovative techniques to use, and I just hire young people who know what they are, because I don't. But I think the standard structure is fairly old-fashioned even, and is easy to develop.
We certainly see in that vision of the having more informatics, ultimately it's serving the customer, because if the customer doesn't feel value from that information, why pay for it? So there is a question. I mean, I'm certain there's similar webinars on the electric industry and gas and others. Frankly, I don't worry about my electricity. I don't worry about my gas. We have to make sure we meet the customer with the information when they want it, how they want it. And so I do think that that's still a learning part for industries. But I think the technology is enabling us to do a better job.
Okay, maybe we can go to one last question to Vanessa or Diane. Vanessa.
A couple of comments. First one, George, I wanted to, Vanessa Libby with the Water and Wastewater Equipment Manufacturers Association. So I appreciate all the discussion on technology, because actually that's our jobs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. George, I did want to respond back to you on this notion of financing and getting access to the pension plans. And I'd be happy to connect you. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce earlier this year had quite a substantial meeting where they brought in some of the major pension plan administrators, and there's literally billions of dollars sitting in the teachers and the firemen's and the different pensions where they're looking for a good return on investment. They're not so much like some of the private partnerships where they're looking for a quick 20% turnaround. They are into it for the long term. So I'd be happy to connect you with some of the folks there because they want to continue that discussion. And the linkage there was, how could we make that pension funding available to finance water and wastewater projects? So they were definitely on point. My question and comment to the panel is, so I've been doing this on the water side for over 25 years, and while we can target a little bit to system size or the like, it still strikes me that we're a one-size-fits-all kind of program when we look at regulating contaminants, requiring monitoring, and taking those standard steps that all water systems have to comply with. But in the future, when we're looking at things like the algal blooms, when we're looking at the Naegleria problems, when we're looking at Legionella, when we're looking at issues with a turnover in tanks, you know, and the quality of water really degrading, does it make sense for us as a nation to start to think about like a HACCP kind of program where we're looking on a system-by-system basis, what are the actual public health hazards for that particular system, and looking at them doing a more comprehensive analysis of the specific health issues for their location and their water system, and having them help manage that, whether it be a source water issue, whether it be you know, stagnation in their water tanks, whether it be a distribution system issue, rather than the one-size-fits-all because we're not regulating all these contaminants, as comments were made earlier. So do you see a role in the future for a more unique approach where each utility works to develop their own management plan and system for providing safe water?
I'll real quickly in terms of my compatriots. It's fascinating you asked that question because to me, on the 40th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act, it gets back to one of the fundamental questions, in my view, sort of on my academic side of my life, of how statutes work. The advantage of uniform systems that are applied everywhere is that your transaction cost for each place is low. Because you've got one number, you apply it everywhere, one technology, you apply it everywhere. So you don't have to have as much personnel to personalize a project because everybody's got to do the same thing. That's why on the Clean Water Act, it was very successful with technology standards because everybody had to do it. The disadvantage is you get one size fits all that may not fit in certain places. You go to the other side, which is we're going to personalize, in essence, customize a regulatory structure for you, and it's going to be different for you, and it's going to be different for you, is that the personnel and firepower on an intellectual basis that you need to be able to create each one of those individual plans is much greater. And this is a time of scarcity of resource in many of the regulatory agencies. I think the question, which I do not know the answer to is myself, I haven't been as close to it on the regulatory side, is in the same way we're using informatics on the utility side, is to what extent can government use the kind of information that's now available that wouldn't have been 10 or 20 years ago to make that customization process less expensive on personnel and on resources, so you actually can deliver it site by site, where each one is going to be a little different and someone's going to have to do that work.
Well, I'd like to, Mark, why don't you wrap up with a comment here, and then I'd like to wrap up so we can move on to our reception.
Well, I like the reception idea. Great answer. Certainly, I just served earlier this year on a panel that was reviewing hazard analysis since we're doing the web hazard analysis critical control point, HACCP, or water safety plan that's used really in many other parts of the world to manage risks. When we've looked at that, that largely duplicates the same kind of controls we have that are embedded in the drinking water regulations around turbidity, chlorine. So you can get to the end product both ways. I completely agree that it requires a lot of the implementation of that around the expertise of the people locally. And so I think really the challenge we have on the 40th anniversary with 52,000 community water systems, 45,000 of them serving less than 3,000 and even 40,000 under 500 people. In a country that has the best water in the United States, in the world, and the attention we've had around the importance of water, can really tolerate in the next 40 years having so many small systems without having some kind of mechanism. And I don't know, I'm the scientist, but we really need to find a way for consolidation. I mean, American Water is a large company of small utilities. There's ways of managing without having to hook them all together. And I think we need to be breaking down those political barriers to find that we have the economy of management and oversight around delivering these value to small systems. I don't know what that answer is, but I can imagine us moving along the same trajectory with the same kind of fragmented industry that we have today.
Let's get one more question from Sylvia, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm sorry, I don't want to get in the way of people and food or the important remarks you're all going to make, but I just wanted to make you aware of two resources. On the education side, we partnered with Future Farmers of America and NRCS and USGS and others. There's a set of 20 source water protection lessons for high school ag science students on water quality and practices to prevent it, ffa.org/drinking water. And secondly, on a number of comments about the unique nature of source water protection and the importance of collaboration, on the website for the Source Water Collaborative, sourcewatercollaborative.org, there is a new toolkit called How to Collaborate. And it's, in addition to reaching out and communicating to your stakeholders, it's also how do you take your source water assessment that's hopefully updated and your source water protection plan and use partners to leverage the limited resources that you have to make things happen upstream and around your source water protection area. So it's designed to have downloadable tools and documents that you can use if you're considering a collaborative or if you're already have one in place and you want to enhance what you're doing. So I would commend both of those to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists and the previous speakers that we've had today. And let's continue the discussion at our reception. It's in the First Amendment Lounge, which is next door. We've got some snacks and some coffee and adult beverages for people tonight. So thank you.